Okay, members, and welcome to the meeting this morning. In the room with me, I have the Vice Chair, Kelly Armstrong, and also Andy Allen. And then on Starleaf, we have Stephen Dunn. No other members are there at present. Members, can I ask if there's any declaration of interest at this stage? Nothing at this stage, and if there is as we go along, that's fine. Okay, we have an extra agenda item in our briefing this morning, and that's a ministerial briefing on welfare mitigations. Members, can we start then by welcoming the Minister? Minister, you're very welcome this morning.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Do you want to go ahead? And first, can I ask you what your timescale is this morning?
Yeah, I have 30 minutes.
Okay, that's grand.
If that's okay, so I'll leave it open for about 10 minutes and then can allow question and answers after. That's okay, yeah?
No problem, go ahead.
No, firstly, just thanks very much to yourself, Chair, and also the committee for agreeing at short notice to see me and to receive the presentation. I do appreciate it. Obviously, I do that because of a frustration and a major concern of the continued delay of the mitigations package from being agreed and allowing me to lay legislation in front of the Assembly. And just to give a bit of background and context, obviously we'll all remember in January 2020, before the institutions were re-established, there was a huge campaign and concern that the mitigations package at that time was running out at the 31st of March in 2020. And the concern was that civil servants did not have the power to extend or to make the payments. Obviously, the Assembly was re-established in January of that year as well. And within a week of that, on the 24th of January, I presented a paper to the Executive on welfare mitigations. And that paper contained the proposals to extend the mitigations beyond the 31st of March 2020, to bin the bedroom tax, and importantly, to close the loopholes that were exposed from when the mitigations were first brought in. I got support around the executive table to go and draft the legislation on that basis at that point, and that's what I done. And in a subsequent meeting then, I had presented the legislation, which comes in two parts. And for that legislation then to be presented to the committee in terms of the scrutiny and then through the Assembly as well. Despite repeated attempts where I have made requests over 39 times, I've sent 12 letters to the Executive Office. I have sent additional letters of support, asking for support for this paper to be urgently tabled with the Department of Infrastructure, the Department of Health, the Department of Finance, and also the Department of Justice as well, and the other departments, DERA, Economy, and the Executive Office, for this paper to be tabled. It's being continually blocked, and I don't say that lightly. The paper has been ready for well over a year. The legislation is ready. It has been drafted, and the regulations to be included. We have the forms and everything else ready in terms of processing this to the committee, and also gave notice to the Assembly that we would be progressing this legislation in this mandate. I'm coming to yourselves this morning just with sheer frustration that this paper is continually being blocked from being placed on the executive agenda. I believe that it's being blocked by one party within the Executive Office, because Michelle O'Neill has already come out publicly saying that she supports the introduction of this paper being put on the executive agenda for a decision to be made on the way forward. And that decision is really about protecting thousands of families who are impacted by the bedroom tax, thousands of families who are impacted by the failure of not closing those loopholes. And that means money in people's pockets. And we are in the unfortunate situation where this month £2 million had to be handed back from my department because that funding was ring-fenced for mitigations. And unfortunately, because I haven't got the legislation in place because of the blockage at the executive level, I'm not able to progress the legislation. I'm coming to you today as well because I'm increasingly concerned that if we don't get this on the executive agenda, again, I'll be raising it this afternoon, for it to be placed on the agenda. I've done that in advance of the meeting, that I'm expecting this paper to be on the agenda for a decision. If we don't get this through, we're running out of time. I've already alerted the committee that I will have to proceed on this legislation through accelerated passage, and I know that that's not the way normally to do business. We have to give the committee time to play its scrutiny role, but unfortunately we have no other choice if we're getting this through within the mandate, and that clock is continually ticking day by day. That if we don't get this legislation through and onto the Assembly floor, we're going to run out of time, and we're facing that impending cliff edge again. So I do think it's disgraceful that despite me having the paper in well over 18 months ago, the money's in place, the legislation is ready, that has still not reached the executive agenda for decision. People may now have different opinions or views in terms of the paper that I've presented, but democracy should take place, and that should be decided at the executive table. Other ministers have not had the opportunity then to make the decision because of the blockage from it even being placed on the agenda. And I'm extremely frustrated, and what I would ask the committee, obviously your role is to scrutinise me, and that's right and proper, but it's also to work with me as well in terms of progressing legislation. And I know that many, not all around the table, have been keen to see this legislation progress, have been keen to make those protections for families out there as soon as possible. We know obviously the winter that we're facing, we know that the cut by the British government in terms of universal credit, the impact that that's having. Here's something that we can do right now. We can extend these mitigations, we can bin the bedroom tax to avoid any further cliff edges for families and worries for families. And we can also close the loopholes, which means money in people's pockets at a time that they really need it. And this is an investment of over £42 million that would be going back into those households in terms of offering those additional supports and protections. So I would ask the committee today if they could communicate to the executive in advance of the meeting and they ask for this item to be placed on the agenda for discussion, but more importantly, for a decision that we can then progress, and that I can issue the alert form to yourselves to ensure then that you get the opportunity to look at the regulations and the legislation, albeit through accelerated passage, but to still have that level of scrutiny around the regulations that are going through. So, Chair, that's where I am at the moment. I do have a list in terms of how many times I have tried to bring this up at the executive, the emails I've sent, the times that I have raised this under any other business. I'm not sure, I think I may have communicated it before, but just to put it in context, I've had this paper ready from the 24th of January 2020 was when the initial paper went in to the executive. Notwithstanding the pandemic, the legislation is in place, the paper's ready to be agreed, and the money is there to do this. So I would really call on your support to call on the executive, and particularly within the executive office, for that blockage to be removed and for the item to be allowed onto the agenda. And I do have a concern that this is being blocked by the First Minister. That's the kind of overview from myself, Chair.
Okay, Minister, thank you for that. I just want to clear something up before we start. You were talking about the committee there and how the committee are here to scrutinise but also to support you. And then you did mention that not all were supportive of progressing legislation. I don't think there's anybody in this committee that is not supportive of progressing legislation. It's something that we have discussed here time and time again. So I just want to clear that up.
Sorry, if I can clarify, I think you made a trick. I says I feel that all, I says nearly all, and then I corrected it and said I think all would be in support of progressing the welfare legislation.
Okay, thank you for
correcting.
correcting.
So I am clear that I have had support around that room. The blockage is at the executive and it's within the executive office.
Okay, then can I just ask you, the welfare mitigations in themselves, have they been agreed? I just want to take it point from point. Have they been agreed by the executive?
No, they aren't. They haven't been. I have the legislation ready, and that has to be agreed by the executive. It's being blocked in the executive office from being put on the agenda to even be discussed or agreed. It was put on the agenda the week before last for discussion only, and that meant that no agreement could take place. So therefore, it's continually being blocked from a decision. And that's where my frustration is. This paper's ready. You have all rightly called on this legislation to be progressed. I'm here today to clearly outline the attempts that I have made to progress it, that the legislation is there, the money is there, and that it needs to now progress to the executive for that decision, and then for it to go into the assembly to be progressed and to be introduced.
So we haven't got, so the executive have not agreed to any of the welfare mitigations. So how have we got, how is a budget agreed for the welfare mitigations if they haven't agreed to that? So, and then also, what about the loopholes? Where do they stand at the moment?
Well, that's the loopholes. Firstly, I'll deal with that. It's contained within my legislation and the regulations that those loopholes would be closed. And also in terms of the budget, I mean, the budget was in place because I brought the initial paper on the 24th of January last year outlining my proposals. That got executive approval. They gave me permission to go and then draw up the legislation, which I done, and I presented that back the following month, and that is the paper that is being continually blocked from getting on to the executive agenda for decision. So everything is ready to close the loopholes, to bin the bedroom tax and extend the protections, and I'm not allowed to progress that legislation and those protections for thousands of families. Okay,
thank you, Minister. None of us sit in the executive, so we don't have a full awareness of what goes on in the executive. But it is my understanding that it may be something to do with there being an indefinite welfare mitigation measures be put in place indefinitely rather than the 3-year plan that is in place at the minute. Can you clarify that?
Yes, well, there's no end date in the legislation, and I had given my explanation to that at the executive. That was my proposal on the 24th of January 2020, and the executive gave me approval on that basis to progress to drafting the legislation and the regulations, and that's what I have done. So the legislation that I have in front of the executive has no end date in terms of the mitigations. That's not to say at a future point in time that an end date could be looked at, but the reasons that I have no end date in the bedroom tax mitigation is because we're going to bring people to another cliff edge in 3 years' time if we put an end date of 3 years within that. Now, I'm happy to look at a review of the mitigations in 3 years. I had already said that. A review that would look, are the mitigations still doing what they need to do? And are there further work or protections that we need to bring forward? And of course, I'm also ready to go with a mitigations panel now to review the current mitigations because that was committed to with a new decade, new approach. To bring people to another cliff edge in 3 years, I think is cruel because we do not have the housing make-up then to meet the need. So eventually what you would be doing is, if you ended that mitigation in 3 years, you would then be saying to a person who has maybe lived in their house their whole lives and who maybe have an extra room, that you have to leave that home or that you have to pay that additional cost. We know that from some of the figures of the Housing Executive that would see a huge increase in debt in terms of housing across the north and particularly within our social housing sector, and that debt could reach the point of over £12 million. So really we would be potentially taking away a mitigation but having to pay the money in another way, and I just think that that's completely nonsensical. We're seeing the impact of the bedroom tax being introduced in Britain and the devastating impact that that's having on families that are being forced to leave the community in which they live. They're being forced to travel hundreds of miles to find a new home. And I was glad that the executive previously had brought in these protections, but I did get the support in January of last year to draft the legislation on the basis of no end date, and that's what I've done.
And is it no end date in all mitigations or just the bedroom tax?
There's no end date put in, but that's not to say legislation at a future point cannot be looked at again in the context of a review.
Yeah, and just on the context of a review, I know you'd said that you're happy enough for a review to be put in place. Sorry,
The Cliff
Minister.
Edge Coalition, the Cliff Edge Coalition and others, you're talking about over 150 organisations from human rights, from the advice sector, from the community and voluntary sector, from the trade union movement, have all supported my proposal that we shouldn't be introducing another cliff edge. They would know the impact that if we were to reach a cliff edge again in 2025, the impact that that would have on our communities. I have agreed, and I have no issue with reviewing the mitigations in either 3 or 5 years' time on the basis to see if those mitigations are still having an impact and an effect. And you'll know with a New Decade, New Approach, there was already a commitment to review the existing mitigations. And I'm shortly here going to be announcing a panel that's taken that work forward. So that review is actually already going to be starting very shortly.
Thank you for that, Minister. Just before I bring members in, and I have Mark, then I have Kelly, and then Andy. No, yeah, that's right. Minister, this committee has been asking for a review since January last year, so it's taken a year and a half before we, and I know there was COVID, but a year and a half before we even have, you're even starting to look at a review. So in the legislation, can it be put in that there must be a review? Because happy to do a review or looking at a review is not the same as there has to be a review. So it's just that point I just want to make before I bring members in. Minister, can I just remind you, if you could make your answers a little bit more succinct, because we've only now got 10 or 12 minutes left and there are 4 or 3 other members need to come in. So I'm going to go to Mark first.
Thank you, Chair. And don't worry, my questions will be succinct or short because you've asked most of them, and you're very welcome, Minister. Apologies, I was a wee bit late on, and I think I was cursing someone as my mic was turned on. Don't worry, it wasn't anyone. It wasn't any one of you. The Chair had touched on it, and I think you have answered it, Minister, as to what is the obstacle. I know there's a blockage, there do be blockages in the Executive Office, and sometimes we don't know what they are, but when this is going on so long, there must be more than an inkling of what it is, and so it is just down to that time frame or the end date or sunset clause, and in that case I would certainly be supportive of your position that we don't want to create another cliff edge and bring people to the brink again and beyond, which is where we are now. We're having to keep extending and building out and out beyond the cliff, and that's not sustainable either. But in the interim, the £42 million that had been approved and set aside, how much of it is likely to be underspent or unspent and have to go back as a result? And you can't even say, I suppose all of it's at risk at the moment because we aren't making any progress.
Well, sorry, we're making payments at the moment, Mark, in terms of we're using the Budget Act at the moment in the absence of the legislation in order to make the existing payments. That doesn't include the payments for the loopholes, and obviously £2 million had to be returned in this monitoring round. As a result of that, I couldn't allocate that to anything else because that's ring-fenced for mitigations. So that has to go back to the Executive then to reallocate. So that is the concern. The Budget Act is only to be used in emergency circumstances as well. So my concern is that has to get approval from DOF each year. It's not the way to do finance year on year in terms of using the Budget Act for that purpose. We need to be progressing the legislation because there are thousands of families that are being caught out with the loopholes that aren't receiving the support and the payments to close it. The blockage is clear, and I mean, I'm going to be blunt, I've said it, in the Executive Office it's with the DUP. It is for the reason they've said they want an end date. They can hold that view, but allow the item on the agenda and make the decision and allow other people to have their say as well. It's the blockage of it being placed on the agenda for decision is the frustration in order to progress the legislation.
And excuse my ignorance in this regard around the workings of the Executive. I know there have been some changes there, but is the 3 meeting rule and 3 minister rule, have they invoked or are they still?
I've written to other colleagues on the Executive asking for support. Some of them have come back in terms of support around this. I know your own colleague, for example, has said that on the Executive as well previously. but the item cannot be. It doesn't really have a rule in terms of it still needs the approval of for the Deputy First Ministers to be placed on the agenda for decision. And as I've indicated, Michelle O'Neill has already been out publicly saying that she agrees that this needs to be placed on the agenda for decision. So that only leaves the First Minister in terms of that being presented to the Executive. I would hope, and what I said at the Executive 2 weeks ago, I want this to be good for the Executive as a whole. I would want to be standing in Stormont with all of the other parties around that table to say that we have been the bedroom tax, that we're extending the mitigations and closing the loopholes, and to do that in a united front. So it's frustrating, and I've said that I was willing to do that, and it's frustrating that we're not at this point.
No, it's frustrating at a political level. It's much worse for those for people affected by it, particularly in the loopholes. No, that'll do me. Just let someone else in.
Thank you,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Thanks, Mark. Can I bring in Kelly, please?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Minister. I know your time's precious today. The Chair's already asked about what's happening with the loopholes, but Minister, sorry, it would be really helpful if we could get some information from you and your department. Can you tell us how much cost per week is lost to people on benefits because the loopholes haven't been finished, and how many people this is affecting across Northern Ireland, please? With that sort of evidence, it would be useful to know just exactly how much we're taking out of the pockets of people across Northern Ireland. I appreciate the fact that you are bringing forward a welfare mitigations review panel. That panel will be looking at welfare mitigations beyond 2022, or 2022 and beyond. So effectively, we'll be creating a budget for the next executive, as the department or as the Minister for Finance has said. If the mitigations are ring fenced, does that then mean, or have you looked at the fact that a future Minister for Finance then can continue on paying those loopholes irrespective of, legislation being in place or not?
Well, you can't pay the loopholes, Kelly, because we need legislation and the regulations to close the loopholes. So we can't make those payments. I know David, my team member in the department, will come in just with the specific figures. But families are not receiving the money that they're entitled to at the moment with the legislation. If we get the legislation through, we can't pay the money to those who are impacted by the closing of the loopholes, because I need the legislative authority to do that. And that's why I'm keen to get this legislation put through. I'm also concerned that we're running out of time here in this mandate. I don't know what will happen after this mandate. And my concern is if we don't get it through now, I don't know if the Budget Act would be enough to sustain the payments overall. But David can answer the specific questions just in terms of how much and how many people in the loopholes.
Yes, hello Kelly, and hello to the committee. So I have the numbers currently affected by the loopholes. Now I have to say these figures are in May this year. These are the latest figures that we currently have. And the number of people affected by the benefit cap who are not receiving the mitigation payment is 640. And the number of people affected by the bedroom tax is 199. Now, I don't have the exact amounts to hand the average amount that those people would be losing out on in terms of not receiving a mitigation payment, but we can certainly get that information and provide it to the committee.
Thank you very much. And just finally then, I'm just thinking about those welfare mitigations. If the same delays happen, when do we run out of room? Is it the end of March 2022 for all Northern Ireland welfare mitigations to come to an end?
Yes, well, that's when the current, in terms of the Budget Act, we would have to get approval again from the Department of Finance in terms of extending that. But that wouldn't include closing the loopholes. So it's just to be clear on that. And that's why the legislation is so important. Also, I mean, you don't know what's happening. There's instability and people talking about pulling down the Assembly. You don't want to be in the same predicament that we were in January 2020, where if the Assembly's not there and ministers are not in place, then officials cannot extend the Budget Act to make the payments. And my concern would be that you would force people into facing another cliff edge. And that's why I want this legislation to progress. The Budget Act is only there as an emergency measure. And we have an Assembly here with legislation ready, and we need to be getting on to do what we're supposed to be doing, and that's introducing legislation.
I agree, Minister. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Okay, members, just quickly, Minister, we still have 3 members wanting to ask. We have Andy, Paul and then Anya. So, Andy.
Thanks, Chair, and no surprise, most of the questions have been covered, Minister. Minister, can I ask, just in relation to the blockage, has there been any dialogue back and forth with yourself and those behind the blockage as to a resolution to this?
There were attempts at dialogue or engagement. I mean, you can see my repeated attempts of trying to get it on the agenda, communicating with other officers and stuff. I mean, I'll just hold it up again. I think I may have shared that with the committee previously, but I have made over 40 attempts. I've also tried to engage. I said previously that I was willing to look at a review. I was willing to look at that on a 5 or 3 year basis. I was willing for that review to be put into legislation, but yet it's still continually being blocked. So I have moved. I've been willing to engage, and it's frustrating that nothing's coming back.
Okay, thanks, Minister. So those who are preventing the mitigations from going on to the executive agenda have not intimated to you at any stage what they would be satisfied with within the legislation. So, for example, secondary making powers by way of regulation to extend or stop the legislation. I would put on record that I myself and my party don't want to see us going towards another cliff edge. Just in the chamber the other day, East Belfast members were talking about the crisis within housing, and you've also touched on that yourself about the number of people who could potentially find themselves homeless if we do not protect them against the bedroom tax. So I don't want to see another cliff edge in that respect. So we're supportive of the approach that you've outlined, but I'm just in the hope that we can get over this hurdle, because there are people at the receiving end of this who are being impacted. Is there any way of being able to unpick this blockage?
Well, I've attempted to. I think in terms of the DUP position, they're saying that they won't allow it on unless there's an end date in the legislation. My concern is that the community out there, the voluntary sector, the advice sector, you've said yourself, a lot of the other political parties support the paper that I brought forward. Indeed, the whole executive supported it last year because they asked me to bring forward legislation on that basis. So, you know, we need to look at that. For me, it's allowing the executive. I mean, parties can have their own position on this. Allow it onto the executive agenda for a democratic vote and decision to take place. If not, the other alternative is that you take it onto the assembly floor and then let's progress that way. If I know other parties within the assembly, if people can indicate to me now that other parties agree with my proposals and what I'm outlaying, the other option is to do that via the assembly floor.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Minister, but everything there that's just been outlined is academic in reality, because if the blockage is not unlocked, it will not come before the executive and not get approval to come before the assembly. So, have you explored, and I know obviously it's not an ideal situation, but could there be a, say, for example, 10 years put on within the legislation and a secondary making power by way of regulation for that to be extended through affirmative resolution by the Assembly? Therefore, there is an end date, but also a safety mechanism to extend the mitigations as required by way of resolution. I appreciate, obviously, that wouldn't address if we don't have an institution, but we can look at that in that regard.
Well, the big thing for me is that my understanding is nobody will budge beyond the 3 years. My concern is I have the legislation ready. It's drafted. It's ready to go. Any change in that, I would have to go back and redraft a new bill. And there's a concern there for me in terms of the timeline of getting this legislation through. I was happy to look at a review in terms of the mitigations, and indeed I'm going to be launching that review very soon. I was happy to put that within the legislation, and that still wasn't acceptable. So, Andy, I would be asking you to ask then, why is it continually being blocked? Why is it not allowed on the agenda for all ministers to make a decision and to take a vote on this matter? And bearing in mind, all ministers in January of last year allowed me on the basis of my proposals to go and draft the legislation. So why did they allow me to do that if they were going to block it for over 18 months?
Well, I'm as bewildered as you are, Minister, and the blockage isn't coming from my party, as you're well aware, and I have asked that question that you've highlighted there as to why is it being blocked and why is it not coming forward, and there's been silence. But just back to your point there around your understanding is around 3 years. Has that been definitively articulated to you that that particular party would only, or those blocking it, would only accept legislation that had a 3-year period in that?
What is it? Sorry again. Sorry, can you?
You'd mentioned around the end date not being indefinite, and you mentioned 3 years. Have you had that clearly articulated to you from those who have difficulty with the legislation as drafted?
Yes, I was told by the DUP that they want 3 years in the legislation.
Okay. I'll leave it.
And that sits against what the sector outside are saying. It sits against that you're going to face another cliff edge again in 3 years. Where people are wondering if the protections are going to be met or not. And I just think that that's cruel to create a never-ending cliff edge when we know the housing situation will not be resolved. We're not the same as England, Scotland or Wales in terms of our housing makeup. That's been reflected by housing lobbyists, but also by the likes of NICFA. And therefore, that's why they agree with my proposals that I have in the legislation.
No, I appreciate that, Minister. And what sounds very much to me, unless we can unpick that blockage, we're going to continue to have a standoff within the executive. Meanwhile, people in all of our communities right across Northern Ireland are being impacted. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, well, I don't feel that there should be a standoff. Put it to the executive, allow the debate to happen and for a democratic decision to be taken. I will respect that democratic decision.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Thanks, Chair.
Grand. Thank you, Andy. Minister, I know you're tight for time. I still have 2 people if you're willing to take them.
No, that's okay. Yes, no, that's fine.
Thank you. Can I bring Paul in, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your answers here today. Again, I've had a wee bit of an inkling of how the Gazette works, but 3 weeks I think I was on. But is it not fair to say, Minister, that you have had 18 months to try and seek consensus and agreement, and that you haven't been able to manage that to this point? And to say that you've got the legislation ready, well, you may well have it ready, but if it's not through the executive, it can't be an executive bill, which means it's not fit for purpose before it would go to the Assembly floor. So is there not a wee bit of raising flares here, because we are coming to a pressure point instead of trying to knuckle down, trying to get consensus, and then trying to get a piece of legislation that is fiscally appropriate and wise at this stage?
No, well, I think, Paul, the blockage is with the DUP, your own party, so you need to ask them why they're continuing to block it at the executive from being discussed by other ministers and for that democratic decision to take place. I have attempted and I've demonstrated over 40 times. I've written to the Executive Office. I've tried to speak to the DUP directly. I've said that I have moved in terms of looking at a review at either 5 or 3 years, to look at that even within the legislation as well. But I've explained my reasons for why I don't want an end date in the bedroom tax mitigation. And I have the support broadly out there within the community to that effect. We don't put end dates on other pieces of public policy and education and health. So why would we put it on the most vulnerable within our communities? And I do believe I have broad support for this. I have attempted to find a way through this, but I'm being continually blocked. And what I'm saying is allow it on the executive agenda to be debated and to be voted on. And I will respect the democratic will around that table if that's the point, or for it to be taken to the Assembly floor and for it to be debated there. But it's being blocked from even getting to that point. And I have demonstrated I'm here because of a frustration. I have everything ready to go. We could have these mitigations in within the next 6 weeks in terms of going through the Assembly process, and then it needs to go and get royal assent. The clock is ticking, and that's why I'm in front of you again now. I have raised this previously at this committee, and I have raised it repeatedly. I've written to other ministers as well. I know other ministers have raised their frustrations at the executive table, but do you know yourself, if it's not on the agenda, it can't be discussed. And even under any other business, I can only raise my frustrations you can't get into the full discussion or even make a decision to progress it.
If it's clear, Minister, and I think this is what you've outlined, and I thank you for your clarity today, the issue is all around the 3-year basis. We have been fighting for 3-year budgets for many, many years. We've worked with 1-year budgets. So why would it be so wrong to have in the legislation a 3-year period, which then could be extended and enacted further with further legislation, whoever the new minister would be in the next term? Why are you so dead against having that surety and that fiscal wisdom, if you like, to ensure? Because remember, whilst this is needed and whilst there are measures needed with regards to welfare mitigations, we're also breaking parity with the rest of the UK, which shouldn't be trodden on lightly. So what would be wrong, Minister, and why would you not pursue a bill that had a 3-year period contained within it, which then could be enacted on and built upon by a new minister, depending on the fiscal arrangements and environment at that time?
Well, firstly, I do have fiscal wisdom. I just don't agree with Tory ideology, and I think that's an important point. We have broken parity with Britain on this issue, and I think that it's good we've broken parity, and indeed society overall support the executive in breaking that parity. For me, in terms of the end date, I know budgets work on a yearly, and then we're trying to get a multi-annual budget, and any piece of public policy or resource will be based around the money that we have. But we don't put end dates in health, we don't put end dates in education, we don't put end dates in housing. Why would we put end dates for the most vulnerable within our communities? That if you did, and if we ended this mitigation, you're putting people out on the street, you're increasing costs in terms of debt. And we know the figures that we have got from the Housing Executive. If this mitigation was to end, debt would raise to over £12 million, and that would increase year on year. And that's the reality. That's why outside the Cliff Edge Coalition and others support my proposals. Now, I'm happy to look at a review. Even the Cliff Edge, and everybody knows that this is all based on the budgets that we have. But why would you want to take people to a cliff edge every 3 years in legislation when we don't do it with any other piece of public policy?
We do, Minister, with fiscal arrangements and budgetary processes. So I don't see the issue here. I just think that we're playing politics here with the most vulnerable in society, and you could give those vulnerable people assurance here and now by including that 3-year period, and then we move on. The new executive in the new term can, depending on the environment that they're in, can then make decisions going forward. And I think there is, I just would like to see this progress so the most vulnerable can get assurance.
Well, I have the legislation ready and the money in place. We can move on this today. So I would ask then, if you want to move on this to protect those people, ask your party to allow it on the agenda and to stop blocking it. So that's the way to progress this as soon as possible. The legislation is there now to go on this. So allow it on the agenda, allow it to proceed and get the protections in as soon as possible. I agree, we need to be protecting the most vulnerable, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Minister, you've produced a bill that cannot find consensus or agreement. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Right.
One party's blocking it.
Right. Can we just get a bit of control in this committee? Can I then ask Anya to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose just leading on from Paul's points there and from what the Minister has indicated herself, the only party that seems to be playing party politics with this is the DUP, and that's just going off, what the Minister's previously stated. It is seemed that they have cherry-picked exactly what legislation makes it onto the agenda. I know, as Paul has said, obviously the 3-year extension, it is debatable between the parties themselves once it's on the actual agenda at that stage, then to debate, exactly, is it going to be 3-year period, is it going to be an indefinite period? But I think the main thing at this stage is that it needs to be on the agenda straight away. The next point is, I'll be quick, Kelly has already indicated possibly getting on a number, if the department has it, in terms of the people that are going to be affected if this legislation does not go through. And I know the department can hopefully provide that to us.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we can get any additional information on you that you need in terms of the committee. I know we've already provided information previously in terms of the mitigations, so we can just give the most up-to-date figures again also. And I mean, I know what I would leave with the committee is just even if they could ask the executive to have this on the agenda for decision and just allow the democratic I suppose, will to run its course, allow for a decision at least to be debated and to be voted on. And that's what I would be asking the committee to support me in progressing the legislation that is there now as quickly as possible, that we can bring these protections in as quickly as we can.
Okay, are you finished there, yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Chair.
thanks, Sonia. Thank you, Minister. Minister, is it on the agenda today for discussion or at all?
No, I don't know. I haven't got the agenda yet, but my understanding is no. And we've already had it on for discussion. We now need it on for decision.
Okay. I know that we wrote again last week to TEO again, expressing our concerns as a committee. So I will take the view of the committee. I assume the view of the committee is that we write again to TEO and ask that it be put on the agenda for decision. I think, personally, I think you're right. It needs to go to a vote. It needs to be. That certainly is the right thing to do because it's just been going on far too long. So it has. And then we'll see what happens after that. So, members, are you in agreement then that we write to the TEO today to ask that this is put on the agenda for decision? Yes?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Look, Minister, thank you. I know we've went a little bit over time, but thank you for coming in and briefing the committee this morning.
No, thanks very much, and I appreciate you taking me at last minute. Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you. All right, members, we're going to move on then to our agenda. So I'm going to move to agenda item 1, which is apologies. I don't think we have any apologies, do we? I think we're all here. Moving on then to agenda item 2, which is chairperson's business. Can I then welcome, we have a new member of staff, as you can see, if anybody in the room with us today. So this is Rachel. Rachel, you're very, very welcome. And I hope you enjoy your role here with the Committee for Communities. Members, also, I know I'd mentioned it last week that it was Fraz last week, but he's now officially stood down as an MLA. So can I propose that we write to Fra and just to thank him for his service to this committee and also his service to the DSD committee, which I sat with him for many years, and also service to the Assembly. I know I miss him, and I'm sure plenty of others around the table will. So members agreed to that?
Agreed.
Agreed.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, can we move on to agenda item 3, which is draft minutes? You'll find the draft minutes of the meeting of the 14th of October at page 6 of your pack. Can I ask that you agree these minutes as drafted?
Agreed.
Agreed?
Yep.
Okay, agenda item 4, matters arising. Okay, members, bear with me here because this is rather long. So we'll just get started. So if you could turn to page 15, you'll see a departmental response in relation to a £5 million allocation to charities and social enterprises. Officials expect to be in a position to shortly present options on the way forward to the Minister for her consideration. A written update on social strategies will also be provided separately. Any comments or content to note? Kelly and then Andy.
Just can we ask the department if there's any possibility that charities will be able to spend that money, or social enterprises, because unfortunately I've been subjected to last minute, it's like Mad March money, and then they end up can't spend it because it's been provided so quickly. If this money is not offered out to charities by the end of November, December, they will have difficulty processing it, because making the application and then getting the money is two different things.
Okay, thanks. Kelly would do that. Andy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. I would declare an interest as a charity trustee, but I would also pose the question, you know, why on earth did the department bid for this money when they had nothing firm in place as to what they were going to do with it? We have a situation where the department's now been sitting on £5 million of money that could be supporting charities who are helping some of the most vulnerable across our society. but there's no information, there's no detail. Shortly, when shortly? I think we've been told for the last 6-7 months that shortly we will be getting detail on the sub-regional stadia programme. The sub-regional stadia programme was endorsed first in 2011. So I'm sure you can sense my frustration with this, but it seems to be a theme within this department that these phrases are being used shortly, etc., and nothing comes forward very fast.
Yeah, it certainly is a theme within this department. I would agree with you on that. So we can write and ask those questions as well. I think you're right. So many times we get responses back and they don't have any definite timelines in them ever. So that really needs to be highlighted as well. So we can do that. Any other members want to make comment or content with the comments that have been made? Okay, we'll move on then to page 19, where you'll see a departmental response in relation to queries we made regarding the report of underpayments in the annual report and accounts for 2020-2021. 23.8 million is an estimate of the level of underpayments, not an actual figure. The reported fraud and error figures calculated are based on a random sample of cases selected from the benefit caseload. Sample cases are checked for payment accuracy and the outcome is extrapolated to provide a statistically valid estimate. In all sample cases where an underpayment is identified, this is immediately corrected and arrears paid to the consumer. Again, any comments? Kelly?
Can we ask the department for a written detail of their audit system? Because this seems to be an extraordinary amount, and if this is just like a sampling of it, how bad actually is it? My concern has been, and I'm sure we've all had it, constituents come forward, they have informed the department of significant changes and the department seemed to take weeks to action that, and that results in overpayments. So what is the audit system? If they could detail that, and if we can also see, are there areas in Northern Ireland, or where is this happening at? Is there somewhere that we need to be putting more staff into, more resources to prevent the delays and cause some of this payments?
Yeah, I agree with that. I know I've certainly have cases through my office where people have logged it on their file, and it hasn't been acted upon for months, and therefore they end up with a massive overpayment that they have to pay back through no fault of their own, because they had logged the differences in their income. But the department had seen fit not to take notice of it until months down the line. Any other comment on this? No? Okay. So we can write and ask that, certainly, Kelly, that's fine. Then can we turn to page 21, where you'll see a departmental response in relation to the HC1 claim for help with health costs. The Department for Communities administers the HC1 scheme on behalf of the Department of Health, who set out the criteria to determine who is entitled to the help. People in receipt of a working age benefit, such as universal credit, employment and support allowance, income support and job seekers allowance, do not have an automatic entitlement to help with health costs. Anyone in receipt of these benefits who wishes to apply for help with health costs must complete an HC1 form. The assessment is income related and based on each person's ability to pay at the time the claim is made. 3 decisions are possible: full help, limited help, or no help at all. Members, any comments on that, or content to know? Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, sure. Another cop-out by the department. The Minister this on behalf of the Department of Health. Appreciate that. No difficulty with that. But what we asked them was, what are they doing to highlight to those who are in receipt of universal credit that they need to apply for an HC1? It's my understanding that on their legacy benefits, that was not previously the requirement. So what we have now is a lot of individuals going and getting that treatment done, or receiving the treatment, and then suddenly discovering after the fact that they owe money because they didn't have the HC1 in place. The department need to proactively be engaging with every applicant to make them aware that they need to apply for an HC1, and also, would their HC1 claim change? Obviously, assessment periods change. So if we have somebody who's self-employed, would they be dipping in and out of eligibility? And will they then have to apply at every juncture?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I didn't read another bit out here that Janice says that I should read out just for clarity. It says any reimbursement of healthcare costs owed will be made directly to the applicant by the Health and Social Care Trust. The Department of Health have advised that they have written to staff in general dental practices, opticians, and also to relevant health and social care staff, alerting them to the interim arrangements to allow for the passporting of universal credit recipients for exemptions from dental and optical costs, and for the remission of costs for travelling to and from hospital on referral. I mean, I know that this is just getting more problematic. I mean, anybody who's tried to make a dental appointment recently will know that there's no longer taking NHS patients, and the cost that is going to put on to people. Kelly, you wanted to come in?
I've just been trying to wrap my head about the words that I want to use here. When someone's on universal credit, they have their online system that they can go into. Could we ask for, as a committee, for a demonstration of that to see exactly where the HC1 is on that and how the alert comes forward? Exactly. So why, and for whoever has created or works on that system here within the department, can show us where they can add in access to forms that people who are on universal credit should be aware of, and where they can access those forms. Because, to be honest, we've got a computer system. I don't see why this can't be easier for people.
No, I agree. Any other comments on this? Andy, you want to come in again?
Make sure it's the same as the advance payment. When the department said, you know, we have that advance payment there, we've already seen by virtue of the statistics that are coming through that it's not being promoted enough within the universal credit system for people to apply for it. This is exactly the same. I don't know, obviously the DWP centrally managed the computer system, so it's difficult around getting those adaptations or tweaks to the system for us. But it should be front and centre that each work coach, the first thing they're doing before they're discussing anything with any applicant is they're discussing those two elements, the advance payment and the HC1, because they're vital.
Yeah.
It could be it could be an automated message from your work coach the first time you go into that to say, remember, if you need to claim health, you can apply for this. If you need interim payment, you can apply for this. You know.
Yeah, no, I mean, the whole issue around advance payments and the system is just, it's something this committee's been discussing for a year and a half now, that has not been addressed fully. I mean, it would be, I'm not going back to welfare mitigations here, but it would have been great to see a mitigation in place that actually looked at the support that was made available from you first apply for universal credit. I mean, that would have been another great way of taking people out of debt from the get-go. Anybody else want to make any comment there? Yes, go ahead, Ciara.
I suppose I'd like to ask, does the Health Minister intend to maybe review the eligibility criteria in relation to it? And like yourselves, I would agree probably around the lack of awareness around the eligibility and how to access this entitlement and what has been the uptake to date. It would be interesting to find out. And also it has to be applied for and it's done on an annual basis as well. Is that necessary? And how is that reviewed? So I would most certainly like to see more information on it and see does the Health Minister intend to maybe review and look at overall eligibility of it. I think that maybe there is time for a review given.
Yeah, I think we can ask a few questions around this. So there's plenty of questions there. Certainly we can ask them of both departments.
Yeah.
We can. Anything else anybody wants to comment on that? Can we move on then to page 24, where you'll see a departmental response in relation to SL1, the Social Security Amendment EU Exit Regulations, Northern Ireland 2021. The committee had asked for a list of the EEA member states that are not signatories to either or both treaties. The response provides a full list of those who are and the 5 states who are not. So members content with that? Yes?
I'm content with it. I'm just wondering if, as a committee, we can send a copy of this letter to Advice NI or other advice sector bodies, just so they know when they're advising people from Romania or Slovenia who are working here or EU under the EU settlement status about this.
Okay, certainly can look at how we do that. Yes. Members, then can we move on then to page 26, where you'll see a departmental response in relation to SL1, the Universal Credit Childcare Costs Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2021. The response confirms that the assistance provided in the Universal Credit Childcare Costs Amendment Regulations will apply in respect of all children. Again, any comments or content to note? Content? Okay. Then can we move to page 27, where you'll see again a departmental response in relation to the Supporting People feasibility study. The study report needs to be fully considered by the Housing Executive Senior Team, and any change to current funding structures would need to be fully investigated in terms of cost and investment in potential changes. Consideration will also be given to any process and system changes required. The final report, including the Housing Executive's preferred approach, will be presented to the Minister for her consideration in due course. Following this, the committee will be updated. So again, this is another one that has been sitting around for a while in the Housing Executive. Again, we've got this term due course. It's a bit like shortly or whenever. So can we? I would ask if we can go back and get actually specifics on that. We want a timeline of when that is going to the Minister and when we're going to see that as committee. This is something, since we've been back here since January last year, that has come up time and time again in relation to supporting people. So I would ask for that, Kelly.
I'm just a wee bit concerned about this because this almost seems like the committee will be updated when it's a done deal. We are a scrutiny committee, certainly a scrutiny committee of the department, and the Housing Executive comes under the department's remit as an arm's length body. I'd much prefer that we do have that scrutiny role to see how the money's going to be earmarked to be spent and be included in consultation. So can we maybe ask the Housing Executive Senior Team, even if it's in closed session, if they could give a presentation to the committee at the time, of course, that the Minister has to have her place, but not that we're just left out of it, because we may have considerations that we have taken evidence on through different sessions that should be considered in that.
I mean, we've had various sessions, whether that has been sessions here or stakeholder events, where supporting people and the providers through supporting people have identified and many issues that they have. So I think that's absolutely right that we should ask for that whenever I know the Minister has to see it first, and that absolutely, but then it should be pretty quickly that we get a presentation on it. That's okay. Any other comment on that, members? No. Okay. I'm going to move on then to page 29. You'll see another departmental response with the documents we requested in relation to the WICTS programme. The response addresses the following areas: delivery review reports, PSNI statistics on areas under paramilitary control, central procurement directed advice on each extension to the WICT scheme, evaluation work on the scheme, a copy of the dashboard, details of the previous and new advisory panels, a copy of the lessons learned from the scheme, an outline of the two programmes and an annotation of the changes in the programme, a copy of the original tender document and a copy of the feedback received from the WICT participants. I am tongue-tied this morning, so members, any comments? Are you content to note that? Yes, Kelly?
I think this confirms what we've heard from the providers of WICT, that what was being reported, there doesn't seem to have been too many issues about that. We appreciate now that the department has decided to move this forward with a slightly different priority, which appears to be, instead of just spending time with women and developing them, it's get them through the process and get them out the other end so that they then set up community organisations or community contacts. What I would say is I don't think that the contract was necessarily completed the way it should have been. There should have been an end roll by where the people, the department who own the contract and those who delivered the contract should have had a very clear end date. They should have had a very clear process for that end, where there would have been close off the courses, do the evaluation period, and then it ends. I don't think that was done. And I think the department, to be fair to them, did say that there was things could have been improved. But I think as a recommendation, as an outcome of this, we should be pushing forward as a committee to ensure that the next programme has specific end clauses built into the contract, or even a grant contract, to ensure that providers are not led with the opinion that this would be ongoing.
No, thanks to that, Kelly. Any other comments on this? I just will be interested to see when this new programme is starting. I mean, we now have a gap, a delay for many women who have been going through this programme, and they've been left hanging at the minute. So I think that delay is not good. So maybe need to get a timeline on that, and hopefully not that will be shortly as well. Members, any other comments on that? No, okay. Nobody online. Then can we go to page 460, where you'll see a response from the Department on the Shared Prosperity Fund. The response highlights that the Finance Minister and departmental officials have consistently sought meaningful engagement with the UK Government on the Shared Prosperity Fund, but to date none has been forthcoming. Details of the allocation for Northern Ireland of the prospectus and investment framework delivered by the UK Government is not likely to be released until 2021 spending review, which is currently scheduled for the 27th of October. It is currently anticipated that the SPF will likely be delivered using similar mechanisms to the Community Renewal Fund, led from Whitehall via the financial assistance powers of the Internal Market Act and largely bypassing the Executive and Assembly. Department of Finance officials are working closely with other executive departments and Whitehall officials to ensure the unique circumstances and needs here are fully understood and considered. Officials continue to press for more substantive role for the executive in the delivery of this programme, or these programmes. Any comments on that, members? Kelly?
Really disappointed at that line, bypassing the Executive and the Assembly. It would be very helpful for us as a committee if we could ask the department to provide a breakdown of the bodies who are currently being funded through European monies, who this Shared Prosperity Fund would have affected, we thought was going to take over from, what the fallout will be if the Shared Prosperity Fund does follow that Whitehall model, because we're looking at another cliff edge here for a number of organisations who have been providing care in the community and support in the community, and we could be in difficulties here in Northern Ireland if it's a Whitehall. It's not Northern Ireland specific, plus it doesn't sound as if it's going to be Barnett consequentials. This sounds as if it's going to be a direct payment. So if we could just get from the department a breakdown of the implications if this Whitehall programme goes forward in the way it's been suggested.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It is very worrying because we did have groups in front of us months ago discussing this and how they were going to be sustainable in the future, and it will leave many of those, particularly within the voluntary community sector, not knowing how they're going to progress and putting jobs at risk. So yeah, I agree, we need to get a bit more info on that. Any other comments on that, folks? No? Okay, I'm going to move on then to page 461, we'll see a response from the Department of Economy in relation to the UK Government's plan to introduce a gas and oil boiler ban on new build homes from 2025. DFE highlights that decarbonisation heat production is the biggest challenge in meeting the net zero carbon energy emissions, as it is mostly met through fossil fuels in Northern Ireland, and mainly oil, which is 54%, and then natural gas at 27%. This is a key difference from the rest of GB and much of Europe, where natural gas is the main source. So whilst technologies available to NI are similar to elsewhere, the solution to decarbonise heat will not be the same. For new builds in Northern Ireland, the Department of Finance is proposing a phased approach to uplifting building regulations in Northern Ireland to ensure that new buildings are net zero ready. The OIF plans to consult with the first phase of uplifts before the end of 2021, with subsequent consultations expected to address timeframes for requirements around low carbon heating. For existing homes, a timescale for the phasing out of fossil fuel home heating oil has not yet been identified, nor has the timeframe for decarbonisation of the natural gas network. A range of low carbon heating solutions will be considered in further detail in a future decarbonisation heat consultation, which is currently planned for early 2023. Members, any comments on that? Kelly?
If we hadn't asked, we wouldn't have known about this. A bit disappointed that the department hasn't been keeping us up to date. This is a big one, and it's definitely going to be a big one for the next mandate. While it may well be a welcome one, when were we going to tell homeowners out there that they need to change their boilers? And what's the thinking behind helping them, and do we have the hydrogen or biomethane options available for 2023 and whatever's going to be planned going forward. I think it might be worthwhile if we wrote to the Committee for the Economy to ask them if they're aware of the programmes and what's being considered, especially since the pilot scheme is going to be introduced in 2022, and maybe see if there's something that both the Committees for Economy and Communities could be working on together.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd originally hadn't written this because the concerns also around the boiler replacement scheme, which we still have in place here. So we're still putting in new boilers into people's homes when we know that they're trying to phase out fossil fuels. So why are we doing this and not looking at other innovative ways? I mean, one of the biggest ways of retaining or keeping people's houses warm is insulation, and yet that is still something that is bottom of the list. When we know that we go around putting double glazed windows into people's properties, and there you've got a 6x4 space in a wall that is insulated when all around it isn't. You know, it just doesn't make sense to me at all that we don't address this issue right at where it needs to be addressed. If Paul Free wants to come in and then of Andy, so Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would agree with what you are saying there. I think we have to remember that this is a ban on new builds, which will affect a small amount of people, not all people currently living in their homes. But I do think it's a very blunt and brutal instrument and way to go about things, especially when we know that the technology isn't actually up to speed yet. Whilst technology moves on apace in this regard, it's still not there yet. So I do think that the government is pushing probably in the wrong direction, and quite bluntly in banning. There's all sorts of ways to incentivise people. Banning them isn't necessarily the right way to go. It could put people into hardship. It could put difficulties into building companies and construction plans because, quite simply, the technology is not up to speed, and environment will be could be particular in some areas. So in Northern Ireland, we know we are different from GB simply because of our reliance on oil. But we're also rolling out gas to the west, which I think is critical and essential for choice out there. So whilst we do have to get solutions, I do believe that oil and gas, and particularly gas, will still be part of that solution for many years to come. So we need to be careful that we don't put a lot of people into hardship and we don't jeopardise people's livelihoods with regards to blunt policy around banning. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Andy?
Thanks, Chair. And I think Kelly touched on it, and other members will no doubt been frustrated across their departments and within the wider sort of community and sector experts. There is that lack of joined up approach, and something I've been emphasising and highlighting to the Department for Communities is I feel that the department could be supported through the establishment of a departmental-led fuel poverty task force, especially to look at in the context of the rising energy costs. And what that task force would do would assist the department in developing solutions, not short-term, short-gap solutions, but meaningful solutions to support those who are currently impacted by fuel poverty, but also then to develop solutions to prevent many, many more households from falling into fuel poverty, and that obviously could have cross-departmental representation feeding in what the Department of Economy is doing, feeding in what other departments are doing, and sectoral experts obviously conveying how they feel that would impact the most vulnerable in our society. So I suppose a long-winded way of saying, would the committee be supportive of writing to the department to encourage them to set up this departmental-led fuel poverty task force?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, I would be in agreement with that.
Could I add to that,
yes,
Chair?
Go ahead, Paul, yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that, but not only that, remember, we're legislating in a vacuum. We have no programme for government, we have no poverty strategy, and we have no fuel poverty strategy. So we are legislating and moving forward in a vacuum, and unless you have the route map out of these problems and into solutions, you're going to drift, and that's basically what's been happening. And again, I'll add the energy strategy too. We need to have that rolled out soon too. So there's a lot of things that we need to see. And again, strategy in itself is not just not need it, because a strategy can sit on a shelf, so it has to be a living, breathing document, all of these things, and we just ain't seeing them. Leave it there.
No, I know, and I've heard you say that many times in the chamber and elsewhere, Paul, so I have, around the programme for government. So members, there's quite a few things there that have been highlighted that we'll
Sorry,
consider.
Chair, just
Go ahead,
one
Mark.
for-
Sorry, go ahead.
for the thing, and I think this is the direction of travel that we do have to go. It seems sudden, but it's been a long time coming. But I just wonder, maybe as a committee, and certainly the department should be doing this anyway, but we should probably try and hear from NIFA maybe at the earliest possible opportunity in terms of what the implications of this are likely to be for the rollout of the social housing development programme in future years.
Yeah, I think that's a good point as well. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Certainly we can look at that also. Members, any other comments on that, or are they content that we move on? Okay, we're going to move on then to agenda item 5. There we go. Finished all of that. If you could turn then, we've got a briefing then, a raised briefing on the Private Tenancies Bill. So members, you'll find at page 464 is a request from Belfast City Council for a significant extension into December to make a submission to the committee's call for evidence on the Private Tenancies Bill in order for the December full council needs to ratify their response. The formal call for evidence closes on the 29th of October, and we start our oral evidence sessions on the 2nd of November, and we aim to start deliberations in the bill at the end of November. So I'm just asking members, are you agreed that we offer the extension they request, provided it is understood that we may be close to completion of our considerations at that point? And I think it's very important we get that submission from Belfast City Council, given the amount of HMOs and other things that they have within their council area, and a lot of private rentals there. So I think it is vital we get that. I really am disappointed that they can't get it through to us until after full council in their December meeting. I don't know why they can't pass it through full council in the November meeting. And that way we would have it, but that just want to make that they understand that it might not, we might not be able to scrutinise it. I've got Paul waiting to come in, I have Andy and I have Kelly. So Paul first, and Mark.
Simply just, Chair, to declare an interest. I should have done this at the start, but I was late in hooking on, just as an owner of a rented property.
Okay, that's grand. Thanks, Paul. Andy?
Similar interest, Chair.
Similar interest, Kelly?
I was just going to say, it might be worthwhile in our correspondence back with Belfast City Council to explain that this is coming up to the end of a mandate, and we don't have the privilege of time, so we do absolutely need their response to that, but they're cutting it very fine for us to be able to include, you know, their information, as you say, Chair, but it's just to spell out that this is an end of a mandate, and we would appreciate it if they could get the response to us as quickly as possible.
Grand, thank you. Mark? Or did Mark want to come in there? No, Stephen, sorry, Stephen Dunn. I've seen the wrong one. Stephen? Steve, we can't hear
Sorry,
you.
yes, Chair, just to also declare an interest as an owner of a rented property. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, Mark, can we bring Mark in?
Cheers, Chair, my hands going up and down like a yo-yo there. I was just, I just wonder, are any other councils going to have or encounter similar difficulty, and may there be other mechanisms whereby they can feed back their response, maybe through NILGA or something, without it being a formal Belfast City Council response, because it is important that we get it, and the earlier we get it, and the more time we have to consider it, the better.
No, I agree with you. I think we do have Solace down on the list. They're certainly coming in to brief us. I don't know if Nilga are down also to brief us. I just don't understand why it can't be passed at full council in November, and why they're waiting to, not unless they haven't finished it. That could be the reason they don't have it finished in time. I think their full council meeting is maybe the first. I know a lot of them are I know my own local council beside me is the last Monday in the month, but they must be like the first Monday in the month or whatever, so they might not have it finished. But no, I agree, Mark, if we're getting certainly Solace in and possibility NILGA, they should be able to give an overall council view across all of the councils. Okay, members, that was all. I just wanted to notify you of that before I bring in Eleanor. So we have Eleanor Murphy from Raise. So Eleanor, do you want to go ahead and brief the members? Good to have you with us again.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to share my screen because I have a few slides. Would that be okay?
Yes, certainly, work away.
Can you see that okay? Yeah?
Yep, can indeed. That's better.
Okay, so what I'm going to do this morning is very briefly go over each clause of the bill. Well, I won't cover some of them because there's quite a lot to ground to cover. And then I'll provide a comparison with housing law and practice in other jurisdictions. And then probably most importantly highlight some of the issues the committee might want to consider. Okay. So if we head straight into clauses 1 and 2, they place a requirement on a landlord of a private tenancy to provide their tenant with a notice containing certain particulars about their tenancy, and the Department of It has indicated this will be a requirement to provide a statement of tenancy terms. So clause 1 applies to new tenancies and clause 2 applies to existing tenancies. And there'll also be a requirement on landlords to provide a notice if a term in the tenancy has been varied. So you're probably asking yourself, why isn't this already law? Well, short answer to that, it was part of Article 4 of the Private Tenancies Act 2006, but unfortunately this was repealed by a 2011 Housing Amendment Bill. So the paper covers a little about why that happened, but just to bear in mind that you might want to consider whether this has had any detrimental impact on landlords or tenants. Now, the department has said that as far as it is aware, it hasn't had any detrimental impact, but you just might want to check that with other stakeholders that that's also their experience. So if we look to other jurisdictions, so both Scotland and England landlords are obliged to provide a written statement of tenancy terms. But two features of other jurisdictions to note is in both Scotland and England, landlords are obliged to provide tenants with an easy read guide or booklets to help them understand what the terms of the tenancy are. And the booklets go much further than that. They also signpost them to sources of help and support. These are produced by government, so landlords don't have to produce these. And in Scotland, you can just send a link or an electronic document to a tenant if you wish. So sometimes tenancy agreements and written tenancy terms are quite legalistic, so this is a useful thing. So both the UK and Scottish governments have also produced model tenancy agreements that landlords and letting agents can use, and these are voluntary. And Scotland's quite digital, so the landlord can enter all the details in and it'll generate a digital format. But in Scotland, an important thing to note is the tenancy terms and the tenancy agreement have to contain certain mandatory terms. So as far as some issues for you to consider, so again, what impact has the repeal had on, or if any, on landlords and tenants? In terms of clause 2, how easy will it be on a practical level for landlords to retrospectively provide a statement of tenancy terms? How far along are the department developing proposals for the notice, and have stakeholders been involved in this? And what exactly information will landlords be asked to provide? And will the statement provide certain mandatory terms, like in Scotland? And if yes, what are these? And so similar to other jurisdictions, will the department be producing easy read guides? And if so, will landlords be obliged to provide a copy to tenants or at least signpost them the information? So in a similar vein, will the department provide supporting guidance to landlords to help them understand their new duties? Will the department be able to provide a standardised voluntary model tenancy agreement that landlords can use? And also, how does the department intend to make tenants and landlords aware of their rights and responsibilities? And then this will probably be a theme that will go throughout most of the clauses. Is the current redress mechanism sufficiently effective and accessible in relation to breaches of tenancy terms? And if not, does the department anticipate bringing forward changes in the second stage reform? So clause 3 really puts in place a right for a tenant to receive a receipt for any rental payments that they've made in cash. So the bill proposes to remove the current requirement for landlords to provide a rent book. So this really provides a safeguard for tenants who pay in cash, and the receipt has to contain certain prescribed information, such as when it was paid and the amount that was paid. So the right to receipt for cash payments is enshrined in law already in Scotland for tenants and also in the Republic of Ireland, but there's no similar right for tenants in England. So some issues to consider. The bill proposed that landlords will be required to issue a receipt either at the time payment is made, or if that's not possible, as soon as reasonably possible after that time. So you might want to ask, what's the definition as soon as reasonably possible? How that's going to be assessed. You might also want to consider whether there's certain types of tenants who may be asked to pay the rent in cash, such as black and minority ethnic groups or migrant workers. And there's also some tenants, as older people, who may prefer to pay it in cash. So you maybe want to ask how tenants will be informed of their new rights in relation to cash payments. You might want to also ask how easy is it for tenants to make a complaint if their receipt is not issued or if it's issued with incorrect information, and what measures are in place to protect tenants from retaliatory evictions or action should they raise an issue about requesting a receipt. So if a landlord persistently denies a tenant rent receipt, this really should be a red flag issue that potentially there's something wrong with the tenancy, whether it's an illegal sublet or it's overcrowded. So you might want to ask, is there a mechanism in place if a tenant makes a complaint about that, whether it'll be shared between different agencies, departments, fraud, for example, benefit fraud. So the clause 4 limits the tenancy deposit amount to 1 month. And I don't have to already, you're already well aware that private rented sector affordability is significant. They should know that I'm becoming more significant by the day. So if you take that a tenant has to pay rent and deposit and letting fees and moving costs, this adds up to quite a substantial sum, particularly for low income households. So I'll just give you an example of a two-bed terrace property in East Belfast with a rent of £574. And this is continuously going up. So if you consider 1 month deposit, 1 month rent, that's £1,050, or 2 months rent in advance and 1 month's deposit, £1,725. Now, some tenants may be eligible for assistance through the social fund. For many families, there's limited financial support. So if you consider the Family Resource Survey indicated that only 37% of households didn't have any savings at all, and 14% only have savings of less than 1,500, and that was pre-pandemic figures. So it really enforces the need for a dependency deposit scheme, so the tenants have a lump sum to move forward into the next property, and also that they may need financial support to help with tenant deposit affordability. So we look at other Scotland. In Scotland, there's a deposit. It requires a deposit of no more than 2 months' rent. But the Republic of Ireland has introduced a restriction of 1 month's rental deposit, and also an advance payment of rent cannot exceed 1 month's rent, and that only applies to tenancies created after the 9th of August, and that's really to deal with the significant issue of affordability in private rented sector tenancies down south. So we have a limited number of schemes that actually help tenants with affordability. I've listed one in the paper called Smart Move, and you may already be familiar with that. But in other jurisdictions, particularly in Great Britain, there seems to be more access to schemes like local authority bond schemes or employer-backed loans, where the employer will lend the tenant, lend their employees some money to pay for the upfront cost of the tenancy, and the tenant pays that back over a 12-month period. And also something to keep an eye on is the Conservative government have bandied about the idea of lifetime deposits for private tenants in England, but there's no details in this as yet. But it may look like something like a deposit ISA. So there's more examples in the paper of those schemes if you want to have a look at those. So some issues to consider. What support is available to private tenants to assist with affordability? Is it adequate, and do we need to think more innovatively? Is there evidence that tenants in Northern Ireland are using high interest loans or other high cost credit methods to fund deposits? And if so, what impact is this having on them? And you may be well aware of this, you can constituency offices. If deposits are limited to the equivalent of no more than 1 month's rent, will landlords circumvent this by asking for more rent in advance or a larger first payment of rent? Has the department considered restricting the amount of rent in advance, similar to the Republic of Ireland, or restricting tenant landlords from front-loading the tenancy? And if so, what's the assessment of such measures? And also, what are landlords' views on this? Some may ask for more rent and deposit up costs if a tenant doesn't have a guarantor, for example. So what steps can tenants take to complain that a landlord is not complying with the requirements? And a related issue is letting agency fees. So Housing Rights has found that some letting agents, despite the communique issued by the Minister for Finance and Community, that there's still some examples of illegal letting agency fees being charged to tenants. So you might want to ask for progress the department's making on plans for a future framework for the regulation of letting agents and fees. The Minister's indicated this is something she wants to look at in the next stage of reform. So Clause 7 restricts rent increases to once in every 12-month period. So rental control is quite a controversial issue, and as you can see in the paper that I've outlined, rent pressure zones in the Republic of Ireland, where it really puts a cap on the rent in the area. But the department looked at this in its 2007 consultation, but wasn't too keen on this issue because it thought it would cause landlords to leave the market. So in Scotland, rent can only be increased once a year, similar to Northern Ireland, and tenants have to be provided with notice at least 3 months in advance. In the Republic of Ireland, it's called a rent review, and it can only happen every once in a 24-month period, and the tenants have to be provided with 90 days written notice. So one notable difference between Northern Ireland and those jurisdictions is that Scotland and the Republic of Ireland, if a tenant feels that the rental increase isn't reasonable, they can apply to a third party to adjudicate, and this is the rent officers in Scotland or the Residential Tenancy Board in the Republic of Ireland. So some issues to consider. Has the department considered mechanisms introduced in Scotland and Republic of Ireland to provide adjudication for cases where the tenant believes the rent increase is unreasonable? And what are its views on this? And what are the views of landlords and tenant representative bodies on this as well? And what other safeguards and initiatives and incentives could be put in place to encourage the landlords to keep rent and rent increases to an affordable level? So the second half of the bill really looks at property standards in the private rented sector. So I'll not labour this point too much, but there has been a review ongoing of the housing fitness standards. Discussion paper was published in March 2016. The paper noted the fitness standard hasn't kept pace with things such as thermal comfort and wider health and safety issues. And so the paper sought views on whether they should be included in a revised system of fitness standards. The department, rather than waiting on the review being finished, wants to move ahead on some of those issues. So you'll see hence Clause 8, 9 and 10. So we move on to Clause 8, fire, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. So Clause 8 proposes to insert a number of new articles into the Private Tenancies Order that will set out new requirements on landlords in relation to the provision of fire, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. These are already in place in England, as you can see, and in Scotland it's also part of the repairing standard. But you can also see there that Scotland has gone a stage further, and from the 1st of February 2022 it is expecting all houses in Scotland to have satisfactory provision for detecting and warning in relation to fires in the home. And you can see as well that there's already provision in the Republic of Ireland as well. So issues that you might want to consider. Clause 8 refers to adjudicating the landlord to keep and repair in working order. It doesn't seem to mention, it's maybe me being pernickety, but it doesn't seem to mention a duty to provide or supply those alarms in the property. And also, would they be expected to also provide specialist alarms for people who are deaf or those with hearing loss, for example? So Clause 8 enables the department to meet regulations setting out minimum standards. So you might want to know what those minimum standards are, how many, what type of alarms will be expected to be installed and where should they be installed? And also, will the department be publishing guidance for landlords on their new duties? Because this does happen in other jurisdictions. So clause 7 also states that landlords are under a duty to carry out works such as repairs where they have knowledge of the need for those works. So you might want to ask, what constitutes knowledge of those works? Does it have to be in writing? What type of proof would be needed? And also, how will compliance with these duties be monitored? And should serious failures be linked with the landlord registration scheme, for example, suspension from the scheme? So finally, there's a requirement requirements are applicable to private tenancies on or after the date on which Section 8 comes into operation. It will also apply to tenancies granted before the date, but only from the prescribed date. So you might want to ask, what is that prescribed date going to be? So in terms of energy efficiency regulations, the paper contains a lot of information about fuel poverty and the impact that this has on physical health. And you can see from the 2016 House Condition Survey, the private rental sector actually has the highest proportion of households living in fuel poverty, followed by the owner-occupied sector. And the Fuel Poverty Coalition's Manifesto for Warmth felt that more action was needed to encourage private landlords to upgrade their properties, and that the current schemes don't really provide sufficient subsidy to attract landlords to those schemes. So Clause 9 contains provisions to enable the Department to make regulations concerning the energy efficiency of private rented sector properties. So regulations provide the tenancy can't be granted or a property continues to be let which falls below Schedule 2 sets out the forthcoming regulations will, for example, define the EPC rating, define the properties that would apply to, identify properties that would be exempt, or provide a power to create an offence associated with non-compliance. So those measures are already operational in England and Wales. So private rental sector properties are expected to meet an EPC band E. There are exemptions and also a cap on the amount that the landlord is expected to spend. So that's no more than £3,500. There's a lot more detail than that in the paper. Also, interestingly, in September, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy launched a consultation with a proposal to extend this to EPC Band C by 2030. And just to let you know, there's also a private members bill. I think it originated in the Lords, and it sort of set a target for private rental properties Band C rating from the 31st of December 2028, with only where it's practical, cost effective and affordable. So Scotland, it did intend to introduce regulations. The draft regulations were published. So by the 31st of March 2022, all private rental sector properties had a minimum EPC band rating of E, followed by, in 31st of March 2025, an EPC rating of D. But these were put on hold due to the pandemic. So I'll find out exactly what stage they're at now. But just thought to that, the draft shared policy statement between the SNP and Green Party outlines a potential future new direction of travel, that all homes have to meet EPC Band C by 2023, again, more technically and legally feasible and cost effective. So some issues you might want to consider. The department say that we work with industry experts and the Department of Economy officials working on the energy strategy to bring forward proposals for the EPC. What progress has been made on that to date? Could an indication be provided to the committee for what minimum EPC standards will apply for private rental sector properties? What type of exemptions will apply? And will there be a cap? Will there be a tiered approach similar to other jurisdictions where it sets a lower EPC rating followed by a higher rating at a further date? And is there an indication when the regulations will become operational? And could more be done to attract landlords to schemes such as affordable warmth, or will other additional schemes be needed to help landlords make energy efficiency changes to their property? So clause 10, electrical safety standards. I'm glad we have an electrician in the committee because this is quite complicated. The bill proposes to introduce a new Schedule 3, which will enable the Department to make regulations concerning electrical safety standards in private rental sector properties. The duties include ensuring qualified persons check the electrical safety standards are met, and the regulations will also set out how and when checks will be carried out. Who will be qualified to carry those checks. So the regulations may require a landlord to obtain a certificate from a qualified person and provide a copy of that certificate to the tenant or other persons set out in regulations. And it also provides for an offence if the landlord doesn't fails to comply with their duties. So in other jurisdictions, this is already in place in Scotland, came into effect on the 1st of December 2015. The Scottish Government has published quite detailed statutory guidance on private landlords on their obligations. So obviously the bill and regulations can't go into detail as to exactly what's needed. So these are in the Scottish guidance. There's two elements to the inspection in Scotland. There's an electrical installations conditions report and then a portable plans test report. So these inspections have to be carried out at least once every 5 years. So England has relatively recently introduced similar requirements, and the only difference is that it does require an electrical installations report, but it recommends that a portable plans test is carried out rather than making it a requirement. So some issues to consider. How often will the electrical safety checks be expected to be carried out? It's not really identified in the bill, probably will be identified in regulations, but it's 5 years in England and Scotland. The Department have an indicative timetable when the regulations become operational. Will the Department publish guidance for landlords similar to Scotland, and will this be statutory or non-statutory? Will landlords be provided with transitional period before it becomes law? And how easy will it be for tenants to report a failure to adhere to the new requirements? And are local councils adequately prepared or resourced to take inspection enforcement action arising from those new requirements? So clause 11 just outlines the new notice to quit period. So I'll just let you read that for yourself. So there's extends the notice to quit period for tenants, and also within clause 11 also provides the FC with the power to amend the notice to quit period in relation to periods up to 6 months or less. So some issues to consider. The Ministerial statement on housing, the Minister indicated she wanted to explore whether the extending the notice to quit period of up to 6 months was possible. The Department's response to the consultation paper stated it commenced the consultation to gauge views on this, and the committee could consider requesting an update on the consultation process and the types of views that are emerging. Also, with the provisions of clause 11 become law, how will landlords and tenants be informed of those new changes? And also the Department stated it would be consulting on exploring the possibility of developing grounds for evictions. Tenants or in Scotland already has 18 mandatory and discretionary grounds for eviction. So you may want to ask, is that any progress being made in this piece of work? And just finally, interestingly, in Scotland, they have a new form of tenancy called the private residential tenancy. And it's open-ended and can only be brought to an end via specific grounds for evictions. You might want to ask, is there any appetite for a similar longer-term tenancy model in Northern Ireland? So that's me, and apologies for rushing through it because there's quite a lot there.
Eleanor, thank you so much. As always, an extremely detailed paper. I don't know, have you counted the amount of questions that you think that we should ask?
I don't know, but I'm going to be too popular with the departmental officials.
And they're all really relevant questions. I could see members around the room here nodding as you were going along there, because it certainly did resonate with them, some of the issues that you've brought up. I'm going to open up the floor. I have a couple of questions here, but I'm going to open up the floor first. Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Eleanor, thank you very much. I'd met with a few landlords, and I'm pleased to say that you're bringing up all the questions that they were asking, so well done you. The legislation is currently silent on anybody that has gone into a tenancy that's less than 12 months, and I know that quite a few of us have been contacted by students. You didn't happen to come across anything in any of the other jurisdictions, what they did with anybody that had under 12 months?
No, Kelly, that wasn't something I looked at, but something I definitely could look at and come back to you.
Yeah, I think it just might be it might be useful because as I'm speaking to the private renters' voice and landlords, there's quite a lot of them are saying that once somebody's been living somewhere for 12 months, it's very clear, but when it's under 12 months, after the year that we've had with students and even with people who will be in temporary accommodation, say for instance if they had a marriage breakdown, or it could be a young person moving out into a temporary accommodation until they get something more permanent, It's what protections can be in place for those under 12 months. That would be really just to compare to see even Scotland what they're doing. It would be useful to know that.
And I know we've been contacted as well by some of the housing rights type of groups who are concerned as well about the protections for those people with less than 12 months. And they were kind of asking, could all people not be, no matter what, have protections, no matter what their length of tenancy? So it might be something to see what others are doing around those things. Sorry, Kelly, to butt in there.
No, that's really my main one. I'm very interested when you said about the frequency of rent increases in Scotland is 24 months, which is more than a year longer. Let me see if there's anything else. No, I think, to be honest, that's you've covered. Oh, the only other thing was when it goes to Clause 8, fire, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, one of the things that has been brought up is where a landlord of a private tenancy in a block of flats, say, where there may be different landlords within that block, and where is the responsibility of who fits smoke alarms, say for instance in shared hallways? And that was something that landlords were just saying, if that's an onus on them to provide and supply, does that also then apply to shared areas or communal areas?
I think there's something in the bill about that, about shared and communal areas. But I suppose the difficulty will arise if there's several landlords within that property who actually does that. So I can have a wee look and see what happens in other jurisdictions, if that's okay.
That would be fab. That's me. Thank you so much, because you covered so much else. It's brilliant.
No, you've covered loads of things. I just want to pick up on something there as well about I know you had mentioned there about a qualified electrician and the regulations around that, which is absolutely spot on. I absolutely agree that it needs to be qualified. I just another issue to do with the likes of boilers and things like that, and heating engineers calling out. I'm only asking this, I just don't know if it's anywhere there, because I live with a heating engineer who did do a lot of rental properties but stopped doing them because he couldn't stand over. Because some of the boilers that people had in rental properties were so old, and he couldn't stand over fixing those and saying that they were safe. Is that covered, not just the electrics of the house, but other things within the house that require safety?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure what exactly the specifications of those electrical safety checks are, but again, if it's okay, I'll come back. I'll have a look at that and come back to you.
No, just that, not a problem. I know we have the landlord registration scheme here in Northern Ireland, because I sat on the DSD committee whenever we were putting that through. Is it likely to change in any way through this bill?
I think the department set up a working group to look at the potential of transferring the responsibilities for the landlord registrar function to councils. They did consult in the 2017 consultation on the possibility of putting in a declaration of that your house was fit, and then ad hoc sort of inspections would take place in councils. So I think that work is ongoing. So we might ask the department where that's sitting exactly.
Yeah, because
in terms of the scheme, our scheme is definitely lighter touch than other jurisdictions. For example, Scotland has a landlord registration scheme as well, but they have fit and proper person tests, so it's much easier to suspend or prevent people from registering if they have things like convictions for fraud, or if they have breached other aspects of housing law, including housing fitness standards. So, and Wales probably has the most ambitious. It has a licensing scheme. So landlords have to be registered, but a landlord who actually wants to manage their own property has to be licensed. Letting agents have to be licensed, and there's certain training requirements to follow, and a code of practice as well.
And our landlord registration, if I remember correctly, it runs through Belfast City Council, isn't that correct? Yeah, that's why it would have been very good to get their response in good time on this bill as well. No, that's fine. Look, thanks, Eleanor. Paul Frew, you wanted to come in, Paul? This is our electrician on the committee.
Happy days.
Go ahead, Paul. You're on silent.
Sorry, you hear me now?
Hear you now.
You've just given me an advertisement there, Chair. My workload could increase greatly with electrical homers now. One of the points you touched on, which I think is very important, because it's all well and good getting an electrical installation test, and then a PAT test is basically just portable equipment, and a lot of that will tenants that own that portable equipment. So there could be a friction there between what's the responsibility of the tenant, what's the responsibility of the landlord, and you could argue that there might well be an onus and responsibility on the tenant to get PAT tested. But you raised the point whereby it's all well and good testing the electrical installation and then the portable equipment, but there'll be gas fires that may well need to be monitored and checked. So it's okay having an onus on putting a carbon dioxide siren in place and a smoke detector in place, but the actual cause of the fire could be a gas fire or could be another piece of equipment in the house, the home itself. So there may well need to be responsibility and an onus on making sure that they're checked and not in a state of disrepair. So I'm certainly going to keep an eye on that aspect, as you know I would. The other question I would have is, I know this is called the Private Tenancies Bill, but there will be a lot of properties out there that would be used for holiday lets in the summer and then temporary lets, 6 months, 9 months over the winter. And so does this bill cater for that type of home or building, dwelling? And does it maybe specifically in some clauses, but then some clauses it's mute?
Yeah, I'm not sure. My feeling is it probably doesn't extend the holiday lets. I mean, that whole issue is holiday lets and Airbnbs. I mean, is very under-regulated in Northern Ireland. Scotland is trying to regulate those things. I'm not too sure what exactly the requirements are for holiday lets, but again, I can have a look at that and find out and let you know if that's okay.
Yeah, that would be great, Eleanor. And then, of course, the issue with the temporary lets, so it's not just your 1 week or your 2 week holiday let, it's your 6 months placement or 9 months placement over the winter months. School teachers, maybe medical employees, maybe on a placement to a certain specific hospital. That's more common than you actually think. Around hospital sites or university sites. So I'm just wondering, how are they catered for within the bill at all, if at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Paul, but I can check with the departments as well and see what the actual scope of the bill is in terms of things.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I think you made a couple of very good points there as well. I mean, I'm very mindful of those 2 young men that died in my own constituency in 2010, 2011, up in the northwest due to carbon monoxide poisoning that were in a holiday let. I do think there has been stuff done on that, but I don't know whether it's strong enough, so it might look at that and see, Eleanor, if there's any way we can tie any of that in to this bill as well. Kelly, you wanted to come back another?
There was just a couple of things, Eleanor, to get. It doesn't say in this legislation when deposits have to be paid back. So is it if you have to give a month in advance, then surely it should be a month to get your deposit back if you moved out. I'm just wondering, should that be put into legislation, because there are some private tenancies that are private tenants, that are saying it's taken months and months to get their money back. Even if they've been told that they're going to get it, it's still taking time. I'm just wondering.
There may be something in the deposit the deposit scheme regulations about that, Kelly, off the top of my head. Sorry, again, I don't know, but I'll find out for you.
Okay. The other thing was then at the very end when it talks about the commencement dates, I'm a wee bit confused and concerned by that. Not everything that's in front of us will be commenced at the same time. So it says there the following provisions come into operation on the day after, which is section 12, this section 13 and section 14, and then 2, the following provisions come into operation on the day after the day on which this receives royal assent, and it lists them out, but there are certain schedules that have been left out. I'm just wondering, do we know, or have you any idea why that would be the case? Is there something more that the department needs to do to affect those, or just wondered, a lot of them are the money ones have been left out?
Yeah, so again, I'm not sure. I know for an awful lot of the bill, the department have to introduce regulations, and it might take them actually some time, particularly with the energy efficiency ones, and working with the Department for the Economy on the energy strategy. So that may explain whether,
Okay, thank you.
some degree, whether there's some delay in the commencement.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Again, picking up on Kelly's point there about, we've had stuff through my consistency office as well, where people have maybe waiting 4 months on getting their deposit back, which has been an awful lot of money. I know you'd mentioned there about the bodies that have been set up in Scotland and the Republic of Ireland. Do you adjudicate on housing disputes and issues? Would that cover that as well if we had looked at something like that model being put in place here in Northern Ireland as well?
Yeah, we don't really have an independent body where tenants can go or landlords can go to resolve complaints. We do have the Housing Rights Mediation Service, which is a much welcome development. But other jurisdictions for independent bodies, like the Third Tier Tribunal, Housing and Property Chamber in Scotland, and the Residential Tenancies Board down south, I know they're not perfect models. The department did consult on the possibility of setting up a housing panel in Northern Ireland to adjudicate certain issues. But again, I wanted to see what's going to happen with the proposals for the landlord registration scheme, how the Housing Rights Mediation Service is working, and they're also their landlord advice line, which is also really valuable before it makes a decision on a third independent body like that.
Okay, thanks, Eleanor. If Mark Durkin wanting to come in, we can bring Mark in.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Eleanor. That's a great piece of work. You've lots of questions, and then we probably have more to add, such as the importance of this legislation. I suppose Kelly had made the point, one of the points that I was going to make, and it's around those shorter leases, the 11-monthers, and the needs for protections there, cited, I suppose, specific regard to students. I was wondering, given that a lot of students are also in HMOs, what sort of read across or tie up between this proposed legislation and existing HMO regulations that there is to ensure kind of consistency across the board there?
Unfortunately, that's one of the questions that I've asked, maybe of the department, because, how does the likes of the smoke alarms and the electrical safety, how does that actually tie up with that? And so hopefully the department will be able to answer that.
And I know, sorry, I didn't know you'd asked that one. My office is going mad here behind me. But clause 8, I know you have asked one around the landlord having knowledge of the need for work. And you says, how would that knowledge be evidenced? Does it have to be in writing or whatever? But there's also knowing about something and accepting the need for something.
Yeah, they're two totally different things. Yeah.
Things. So, okay, a landlord might know that the tenant has been complaining about something, but might dispute that this piece of work actually needs done, and I don't know then who arbitrates or makes the decision that can, yes, it does, and now you have knowledge of it.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And again, I think it's probably a question for the department to answer in terms of how that's going to actually be interpreted. or actioned? You know, how's that going to be determined? I could have a wee look to see what way Scotland is. Obviously, they already have similar regulations in place, and see what guidance they have on what knowledge actually means.
And just a wee issue in clause 9 where you've asked, you know, could more be done to attract or make landlords aware of affordable warmth schemes? To be careful there as well. You know, obviously we want all properties, and particularly those, for the purpose of today's conversation, the private rental sector, to be up to the requisite standard. However, I am aware of times or incidents in the past where landlords have actually used their tenants' financial situation to be able to qualify for affordable warmth. Had the work done and then given notice.
Yeah, so maybe in terms of putting something in place where,
Again, it's the value of the property and the market.
yeah, maybe a case of putting something in place that if a loan scheme says set up, or to make it a condition of affordable warmth, that, you know, you have to have the tenant in that property for a specific period of time, something around that.
I think that's important. But no, thanks a million, Eleanor.
Okay, thanks, Mark. No other questions for Eleanor at this stage? No. Okay. Look, Eleanor, thank you. Thank you so much. A great paper again, and good to have you with us. And no doubt we'll have you back as we go along. And our new Tuesday morning Private Tenancies Bill meeting. So thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you, Chair. Bye, members.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 6, which is SL1, Jobseekers Allowance and Employment and Support Allowance Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2021. You'll find the proposed rule at page 593 of your meeting packs. This will make amendments which are required to correct an error made in the Social Security Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations Northern Ireland 2017 regulations where a consequential amendment was missed. So, members, any comments or content the Department proceed to make that rule? Content?
Great.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 7, which is SL1 Employment and Support Allowance and Universal Credit Coronavirus Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2021. Sorry, Mark wanted to come in. Mark, was that on the previous one? Bring Mark in.
Yes, right, Chair, this is where the star leaf is really difficult. Sometimes I was just, could we ask, had there been any consequence of that error or omission? Do you know how has that impacted on anyone here, and how many people?
Yep, we can do that. Yep, Mark, thanks. Good point. Okay, back then to agenda item 7. This proposed rule is at page 598 and will amend the expiry date in Regulation 5.2 of the Employment and Support Allowance and Universal Credit Coronavirus Regulations Northern Ireland 2020, SR 2020 number 33, so that they will now expire on the 24th of March 22. So this is that extension. Members, any comments? Are content to Department proceed to make the rule? Content?
Yeah.
Can I just ask, the work capability assessment, I'm not sure how widespread this is, but there does seem to be those people who have been on ESA, have medical conditions, they're not undergoing work capability assessments, but their ESA is not they're not being recognised as being in the, I can't remember the category, as the special category, or that's being changed, but it's being done without regular work capability assessments. Can we maybe ask the Department, while this is fine to go forward, how many people are currently on ESA in the special category, and how many have come out of that in the last year? Okay. Because there does seem to be a move to get people out of, recognition that they can't work, which is a bit strange. Yeah.
I think, isn't there 3 different groups within that? Yeah. No, we can ask those questions, that's fine. But we're content to allow the Department to go ahead and proceed with the rule, Okay, agenda item 8 then, which is SR 2021-281, the Social Security Amendment EU Exit Regulations, Northern Ireland 2021. You find a copy of this rule at page 603. We did have a briefing on this, so can I ask members, have you any objections to this rule?
No.
No objections, then I'll put the following, that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2021-281, the Social Security Amendment EU Exit Regulations Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Okay, members, we're going to move on then to agenda item 9, which is correspondence. You'll find the correspondence memo at page 610 of your pack. I want to draw your attention to 2 requests to brief the committee at pages 613 and 615. As you know, members, we have very little time outside the 3 bills that we have to deal with, and I would propose that these 2 organisations are added to a stakeholder event. Are members agreed with that?
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Members, at page page 711 is a letter from a Dr. Andrews in relation to Forest na Gaeilge. We had forwarded his original letter to the department for comment, and they forwarded the department's response to him. And then forwarded that response to him. Dr. Andrews believes that the department did not focus on the issues he raised, and is now asking that we recommend to the Minister that a review and reform of the functions of Forest na Gaeilge is carried out. Members, what are your views on this, please? Anybody, any views on this?
I'm just wondering, there is a departmental complaints process. Surely that wouldn't be for the committee to be involved with, unfortunately. I think maybe we need to go back to Mr. Andrews and say to him he needs to follow that formal committee process, communities complaints process, as opposed to, because it's sort of outside the remit of the committee, unfortunately.
No, I think that's a good idea, that we'll send that on to Mr. Andrews. Would members agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, any members want to bring up anything under correspondence that hasn't already been talked about, or do we agree with the correspondence memo then? Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Good stuff. Agenda item 10 is our forward work programme. Members, at the meeting on Tuesday the 2nd of November, we will commence taking evidence on the Private Tenancies Bill. On Thursday the 4th of November, we will, Tuesday the 4th, I'm confused now. Tuesday the 2nd, we're going to start on our Private Tenancies Bill, so that's our extra committee meeting. We'll begin in from then, and then on the 4th of November, we'll continue our deliberations on the Charities Bill. Okay. Also on the 4th, we will be briefed by Capita and the Department on the renewal of the PIP contract, and committee staff are working on a full forward work programme for consideration of the bills, and will provide this after recess.
Okay.
Anything members want to bring up with that? Are happy enough with the forward work programme at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay, members, before we go into our next part, then will be the committee deliberations on the charity bill. We'll have the department in with us as well. Can I then just ask members to take their ease for a few moments?
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.
Okay, members, we're going to then move into the committee deliberations of the Charities Bill. Members, there are two pieces of new correspondence from an individual which is in your tabled papers. The individual has been in touch with a number of committee members also. The individual has requested that the submission is considered in the context of charity regulations. Can I then just ask, are members content to note that correspondence?
Agreed.
Content to note, thank you. Members, the committee will now commence its deliberations on the charity bill, and just to remind all, the aim of the deliberations today is to clear up any outstanding issues, queries in respect of the clauses of the bill and the evidence received, identify whether there are any further information or clarity required, and decide on whether any amendments are to be considered and if it would be the most appropriate course of action, or whether the committee recommendation or ministerial assurance would suffice. Clarify with the department if this is something that the minister would be happy to undertake, either ministerial assurance or amendment, and if we do propose any amendment, to be precise as possible on what we want the amendment to achieve. Members, you've been provided with a paper for this item starting at page 716 with a copy of the bill. Members have also been provided at page 732 with a response from Mr Crawford in relation to his freedom of information requests on the bill. Also included again are the departmental papers from last week's meeting, which members find to be very helpful in answering a lot of the committee queries on the bill. These papers start at page 787. The version 2 updated clause by clause evidence summary table starts at page 820. We have with us today Sharon Russell and Martin Ireland from the department who are in attendance. And I don't know if Claire's with us today. I should know.
Apologies, no, I should have said Claire is unwell today. So
Claire's unwell, so
she's I think she's listening in the background, but she's not well enough to.
Well, if you're listening on the background, Claire, I hope you get well soon. Just to remind members that this is not a formal clause by clause at this stage, and we now have the opportunity to go through the clauses during the next 2 or even 3 meetings and comprehensively review with the department any issues raised by stakeholders or committee members, and to ask for clarification on how the bill addresses these concerns and any additional action that the department intends to take on the back of the evidence the committee has received. Members, could I also remind you that we heard from the independent review panel in closed session last week, and therefore we still should not refer to anything they raised in their work as it's yet not published. So members in agreement that we proceed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, then we're going to move then to clause 1, which is actions of commission staff treated as commission actions, and remind members that questions or comments should be focused on this specific clause under discussion. If our members are content, we'll make a start and welcome to the meeting then Sharon and Martin. Sharon, can I ask you then to give a very brief overview on each clause, and then I will highlight any specific issues that have come up so far in our evidence on the clause before I ask members if they want or have any queries. So starting then with clause 1, then Sharon can just give that overview.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members, for having Martin and myself back. So I will be very brief because I know that some of the clauses, particularly clause 1, is quite complex. Clause 1, simply from the Department's perspective, returns charities to the position that they enjoyed prior to the judgments, with some caveats or carve-outs. So it's complicated. It deals with making previous unlawful decisions lawful, except where to do that would likely impinge on the rights of individuals under their ECHR rights. Provides fresh appeal rights in accordance with Schedule 1 of the 2008 Act, where such decisions are made lawful, and that then disapplies accounting and reporting requirements for past periods. That was important to ensure that charities aren't overburdened where they have not continued to provide accounts and reports voluntarily to the Commission, although, as committee has heard from us, quite a number of them have. That's the overview that I was going to give, rather than going into clause 1.1 to 1.9, as we did last week. But, you know, we're here to take any questions or provide any clarifications. Madam Chair.
That's great. Thank you, Sharon. They just said, members, you've in your packs an updated version 2 of the evidence summary document starting at page 820. Okay, I just want you to bear with me a few minutes here because I'd mentioned there that we had sent out to you yesterday evening the various issues that have been highlighted with the committee, presented through to yourselves, Sharon and Martin, and also all of the committee members. So I just want to read it out so we have it on the record and Hansarded of the issues that have been brought up. And then Sharon, maybe then you could address some of those issues after I read it out. So just bear with us. So, firstly, regarding the retrospective nature of the legislation, the majority of respondents felt that Clause 1 would meet its policy objectives and that the retrospective effective to make the majority of decision-taking by Commission staff lawful is dealt with sufficiently in the clause. Some respondents felt that retrospective legislation is not usual and can have unforeseen consequences because some activity that was not intended to become lawful has slipped through unnoticed until it is legally challenged at a further date. In this regard, one respondent said that there is the potential for a decision that might have been deemed unlawful had it been challenged prior to this new legislation to become lawful by default. Other potentially unintended consequences highlighted were the potential for adverse consequences for charities and the third sector if, for example, a decision made legally by the judgments had in fact originally been a beneficial effect in that it had been protected a charity, and the unlawful exercise of a power by staff prior is made lawful by the bill, but following public consultation is not included in the schedule of delegation as one of the powers which the Department believes it proper for the Commission staff to exercise. Moving on to decisions still subject to legal proceedings. There was general support for any decisions still subject to ongoing legal proceedings, not being subject to the clause to protect individuals' rights, and that the certain matters set out in clause 1.5 to not be subject to clause 1.2, rendering those decisions and orders unlawful. Regarding refreshed appeal rights, the overwhelming majority of respondents felt that 42 days was too short. Proposals were made that the time be extended to 3 months, with one respondent asking committee to consider somewhere between 3 and 6 months. With regard to appeals, it was queried whether the 42-day period should run concurrently, as is the case under the Charity Tribunal regulations, and it was highlighted to us that it would be more useful to allow for an appeal to the Charity Tribunal after the result of the decision review, as this would be more practical for charities and avoid proceedings in the Charity Tribunal having to be withdrawn. A proposal was made to suggest that Clause 1.5 matters that are not already subject to the matters outlined in Clause 1.3 and 4 should also be afforded the refreshed appeal rights rather than being excluded. There were also a number of proposals from legal bodies to remove 1.5 from the bill, because of that issue. It was also proposed that by one individual that all decisions, orders and directions that are made retroactively lawful are made appealable in the bill, even if not specifically allowed in Schedule 3 of the 2008 Act. Legal bodies also required why Section 37, part of direct application for charity property, was not included at Clause 1(5)(e). There are a number of other issues raised with us that are not directly related to Clause 1, but are probably best highlighted here, although one strays into Clause 3 matters. A number of respondents highlighted that it was not good that there is a lack of opportunity for Northern Ireland charities to have a charitable incorporated organisation or CIO structure regulated in Northern Ireland, and requested the bill deal with the matter. And the individual who was too unwell to brief the committee highlighted in his written submission that the absence of choice in Northern Ireland to not being a registered charity, even when an organisation's true purpose are not exclusively charitable, and therefore that a choice to register should not be based solely on a financial threshold. Okay. Where do we start there? I don't know, Sharon or Martin, if you want to come in on anything, and then I'll open it up to members then.
Could I invite Martin, Madam Chair? We've obviously been watching and listening to the evidence and considering all of these issues raised, and certainly Martin, who's working very closely with our departmental solicitors and our drafters in the Office of Legislative Counsel, has some responses to offer to committee at this stage. Martin?
Thanks, Sharon. Madam Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yep. And indeed, Martin, go ahead.
Okay. With regard to the retrospective nature of the legislation, it is unusual. The Department accepts that. And we did a lot of work to ensure that there were no unforeseen consequences. We took a lot of care in that regard, carrying out an exercise to try and identify where those unintended consequences might be. And that is really what led to Clause 1(3) to 1(5). And then the fresh appeal rights are an extra layer of safety in that regard. With regard to the idea that there's potential for a decision that might have been deemed unlawful had it been challenged prior to this legislation to become lawful by default, the aim of the bill, as Sharon said, is to return charities to the position they were in prior to the McBride, with certain caveats. It's impossible to know what may or may not have been deemed unlawful if it had been challenged, the fact being it wasn't challenged. The vast majority of decisions are uncontroversial in nature and were largely welcomed by charities. Moving on to the potential for adverse consequences for charities in the third sector, if a decision made illegal by the judgments had have been a benefit to the charity. The only decisions to remain unlawful are those where potential ECHR impacts were identified, if the bill was to make them lawful, or where a Schedule 1 committee had made a fresh decision and making both decisions lawful could have created uncertainty. It does not necessarily follow that the actions of a third party taken on foot of an order that is to remain unlawful are themselves unlawful. If challenged, third parties could seek to rely on Section 175 of the Act in that they believed that the order was lawful at the time and were therefore obliged to follow it. There's also the facility for trustees who are concerned about personal liability to apply to the Commission for a waiver under Section 91. With regard to the decisions being made unlawful and then a further scheme determining that some of those decisions should in fact be taken by commissioners, there's no legal impediment to doing that. Any scheme of delegation can be reviewed from time to time and functions to be delegated changed. With regard to the 42-day appeal, it must be remembered that we don't expect that there will be many fresh appeals. That, as I explained before, is due to the passage of time and the small number of appeals that emerged when the decisions were first taken. Having said that, we've listened and we've contacted DOJ, and they've expressed no concern in principle should we extend the appeal time frame for appeals arising from this bill from 42 to 91 days, for instance. With regard to Clause 1.5, not having appeal rights, our intention in designing Clauses 1.3 to 1.5 is that the bill should not interfere with these decisions in any way, so that they can proceed to their natural conclusion via the courts if necessary, thereby protecting the rights of individuals under ECHR. That being the case, no fresh appeal rights are considered necessary, as these orders remain unlawful and can be challenged. With regard to providing fresh appeal rights where they're not provided in Schedule 3 of the Act, we're currently providing a table of decisions as requested by the committee and hope to have that with you in the coming days. As previously stated, the aim of the bill is to return charities to the position they were in prior to McBride. We believe, therefore, that to introduce appeal rights where none previously existed possibly goes beyond the scope of the bill. In any case, the numbers of such decisions, the nature of them, and the passage of time whereby charities would have acted upon them and moved on, we do not feel warranted. If we were to consider this approach, we would need to consider what it was that should be appealed or reviewed, who should have those appeal rights, and the powers of the tribunal if such an appeal were to be successful. As said before, most are uncontroversial and were welcomed by charities. With regard to Section 37, the reason why it is not included in 1.5 is because the Commission took no decisions under Section 37 prior to McBride. With regard to CIOs, there already exists a power in the Charities Act Northern Ireland 2008 to introduce CIOs through regulations. So it's therefore not necessary to include a power or provisions in this bill in that regard. With regard to registering charities that are not exclusively charitable, if an organisation is not exclusively charitable, it cannot be registered charity in Northern Ireland. That, I hope, addresses the issues raised there. If the committee have any others, I'd be happy to try and address them.
Thanks, Martin. Kelly, you wanted to come in?
Martin, thank you. Just on that last point, so if a charity, for instance, has objectives that are charitable, but the actions of the charity are not those objectives, then that charity can't be a charity then, are you saying? Or if they have the objectives of a charity, then they must be a charity. But if they're a company that has charitable objectives, but they're not actually, they do more than that, do they have to be registered as a charity?
Kelly, I'm the Charity Commissioner, the experts in this.
Okay.
The Act makes it clear that for an organisation to be a charity in Northern Ireland, it must be independent, it must be subject to the law of Northern Ireland, it must be exclusively charitable, and it must provide a public benefit. The Commission are the ones that compile the register, and they do the operational side of that. So if you have any questions in that regard, I can certainly direct them to the Commission and get your response as quickly as possible.
That would be very useful, because we've heard evidence from people who have said that they've had no choice, and even though they believe that they haven't been exclusively charitable, they have been forced to register under the new system and then had assets stripped or moved out of their company.
It's certainly my understanding that it is the governing document of the charity that determines their charitable status.
Okay.
But as I say, if you have any specific queries in that regard, we can direct them to the Charity Commission and get back to you as soon as we can.
I'm interested in that because last week we heard from Colin Jess of the Social Enterprise, and he was able to confirm of his 900 members that while they all have a particular social benefit to their companies where they invest their money back into community, only 50% are charities. So I don't quite understand, if their objectives are charitable, why they don't have to be charities, and how come they can have a choice and previously others didn't have that choice.
As I say, I don't believe it's a choice. It's down to their governing document and whether they're exclusively charitable.
Okay. Can we
say the Commission are the experts in this area.
Okay. Well, could you get that for us, or do we need to write as a committee for that?
We can get that for you.
That would be useful. It's just I'm completely confused by this part. I don't understand how social enterprises can choose not to be charities, and other companies have been told they must be charities, especially if they may well have written objectives. You know, anybody can put down a written objective, but if they're not actually delivering or they're doing more than those objectives, then anybody could say that they're a charity then and put down wonderful words on a page, but actually when you go and look at their finances, they're doing something completely different. So that might put a question mark over how charitable is a charity. Yeah, it would be useful to have that information. The other thing then regarding CIOs and no power to introduce CIOs through this bill, I'm just wondering, is that something that you guys will be reflecting upon? Because I'm not sure why we would exclude that type of company in Northern Ireland.
Certainly, we'll be looking at as we go forward. As you know, the independent review will be reporting, and I'm sure they'll consider that area. As I said, the fact is, within the Charities Act as it stands, we could, through regulations, introduce CIOs.
Okay, thank you. And just to say thank you very much on the 42-day appeal, are you guys taking that forward as an amendment to what's been produced so far?
We have
Karen, would you?
Yes, we have to put it to the Minister. But, you know, obviously we have, as Martin said, he used the word listening. It couldn't be clearer to us from the evidence that the committee has taken that our current position on it would be insufficient in terms of the days allowed. So I think that speaks loudly to us, and I'm sure the Minister will respond, but we will come back to you.
Thank you.
Once we update her, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Kelly?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, can I bring in Paul Free, please? You're in silent, Paul?
Yeah, you hear me now?
Can indeed.
Yes.
So thank you. And so just on that point that Kelly raised, just so that we're clear, are you saying, because there was movement in my office here and I was easily distracted, some would say, are we saying that you are minded to bring forward an amendment? Is that what you said?
Just that we haven't discussed with the Minister yet. We haven't fed back to her, you know, from our session last week and from today's session. But as I say, we work with a very listening Minister who is bringing this bill to correct previous failings and to give certainty to the sector. She is a listening Minister, and I would be very surprised if the Minister wasn't minded to act on what we've heard and what she's heard. So, but just obviously we have to make sure that she's, you know, content.
Yeah, and given the fact that the Minister is such a listening Minister, would she be prepared, if she is prepared to do something, being the listening Minister that she is, to do it at consideration stage?
Yeah, we'll put the options to her on it, yeah.
As opposed to further consideration stage?
That would be helpful.
I suppose all I can say is we genuinely will put the options to her and seek to resolve as quickly as we can. You know, it's I think it's very clear from the evidence you've heard and from views around the committee table that as currently drafted, I think we as officials, Martin, you know, would acknowledge that it seems insufficient in terms of how it's drafted. So,
okay,
yeah,
and I appreciate that you can't give us anything more concrete than that until you speak to your Minister, so we know certainly we'll give you the process and the place to do that. I think, Chair, we may well have to do a wee bit of work on this ourselves with regards to the amendment that we would like to see, just in case something would go wrong with the listening Minister. Can I ask then on the and again, sorry if you've covered this point and I've missed it, I really do apologise, 22.3 that we talked about last week, and whether that should be an appeal, should be allowed to appeal. I think Martin did talk about why would you give something that didn't have an appeal mechanism before, and whether that would be part of the scope. Is that what we're talking about when you talk about the scope of the bill? Is it 22.3, or are you still exploring that?
we're still seeking legal advice on 22.3 and 23.1 to see, in fact, if there are ECHR impacts there, and if there are, then we would seek to address them in possibly through including them in clause 1.5. But to provide fresh appeal rights where none existed, as I say, could be problematical. We'll certainly we'll come back whenever we have the legal advice and more certainty if there's an issue there.
Just so that I'm clear, and again, I'm saying this with you having already said that you're seeking legal advice, so you won't maybe be able to answer this, and I get that, but it's just so that I'm playing it out in my primitive mind. What would be wrong with giving fresh appeal rights in this piece of legislation going forward, considering that you're bringing forward a piece of legislation which is unique in its own right with regards to the retrospective nature of it? What would be wrong with commencing appeal rights for the here and now going forward?
It depends on the nature of the order or decision that doesn't have appeal rights and why that arose. For instance, and when you see the table that we provide you, hopefully this will become clearer. For instance, the making of C-price schemes by the Commission. A C-price scheme is done at the request of someone acting on behalf of a charity to apply property or money, for instance, as close to the original intentions as possible. In making that scheme, it's usually the solicitors of the charity that request that and suggest how that might be done. And then that is, whenever the Commission make the scheme, there's the chance to challenge it at that point because it's published, and the chance to appeal it are at that stage really, prior to it actually being made. Once it's made and acted upon, and you've got to remember that most of these orders, when royal assent is achieved, will be between 3 and 8 years old. If a C-price scheme has been made 7 years ago, it will already have been acted on and the charity will have moved on. So to provide a fresh appeal right in that instance, what is it actually that you're going to appeal? Who is it that's going to appeal it? And what would the tribunal be able to do in that circumstance? So it's a whole distinct area of work in itself to look at this. With regard to 22.3, from memory, 23.2.3 has appeal rights. The issue is that they're limited to the people that the orders were issued to, rather than the people whose information may have been shared as a result of those orders. So again, what would they actually be appealing? We'd need to look at that very, very carefully.
So
I think if
yeah, go on ahead, Sean.
Just for the members, Ben. Sorry, Mr. Frew, but just if it gives you any assurance in terms of the broad principle that we've always said, no minister, let alone a minister who has very publicly articulated her commitment to rights in this regard, would want to bring forward retrospective legislation that would cut across people's rights. So she has very publicly and repeatedly committed to making sure that that she doesn't cut across anybody's rights. So in terms of that broad principle, as Martin said, we're going to be taking further advice, and it is complex underneath some of these decisions in the categories. But where there is any, when we take the legal advice, where there is any scope or any evidence to support the view that we could cut across people's rights, where the minister has committed not to doing that, of course we would be looking at how we can pick that up and address it. And I think we could give you that commitment at this stage whilst we continue to work on the legal advice and talk to OLC on the drafting. Definitely.
And I get that that's very, very complicated. I suppose from my primitive mind, Martin, what you said about what could happen if we give fresh appeal rights, is the worst that could happen that it would just be mute, that it would just be redundant? or do you see any negative unintended consequences by giving fresh appeal rights?
With regard to 22.3 and 23, I can't make any definitive statement at this point because I haven't received the legal advice. With regard to the others, you're probably right. To provide new appeal rights, it's unlikely they would be exercised.
Yeah, but they won't do any harm in themselves being on the pages of the blue bill.
I can't see how they would do any harm, but I would need to consider it very carefully. As I said, in the case of a scheme, for instance, that scheme will have been made and acted upon years ago. Yeah. Whether we could do anything at all that would unpick that, I would say is highly unlikely. But we'd need to consider it very carefully.
And the only reason why I'm intrigued by it is because of the retrospective nature of the bill and clause 1. I wouldn't be looking to give up fresh appeal rights for something in the past, other than the fact that this gives retrospective legality. So that's the only reason why I'm not convinced we don't need it.
As I say, hopefully the table, which we hope to get to you in the next few days, will make this clearer, and we can go forward from there. We'll certainly investigate it further.
Okay, Chair, that's me in this round. But just to say that because we haven't yet seen that table, and obviously the good work of the officials to produce that paper, we're very grateful for that. But I think we just need to hold the thought, or that we may well need to amend if need be in a committee sense. If when we see that table, we're still not satisfied. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Kelly, you want to come back on that?
A very quick supplementary, just following on from what Mr. Frew was saying. Is that table going to contain details of decisions that were made where there are still legal proceedings going ahead? And if there are legal proceedings still in place at the moment, I know you've said, Martin, that there would have been decisions made years ago, and in some cases decisions were made, and they're still in the process of challenges and sorted all that out. Does that mean that if there was a retrospective piece come in, that they could be within the scope, or they would definitely be outside of the scope? I'm just wondering, will the table include those that currently are still going through some legal process, and if there is, will they be within this scope, or will they be out under, because 22.3 and 23 aren't there?
If there is, the table will provide all decisions taken by the Charity Commission prior to McBride. It won't set out individual decisions. It'll only have numbers against categories. If there is ongoing litigation in any of those categories, clause 1.3 will mean that they'll not be made lawful.
Oh, right, okay. That has me completely confused now, but I don't think I can discuss it because they're still legally open. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, okay.
Would it be helpful? Would it be helpful to the member, Martin, and if we could, beside those numbers, state the numbers within those categories where we know or we are aware that litigation remains ongoing or challenge? Could we do that?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
We should be able to do that. I believe there's very few that remain ongoing, but we can certainly attempt to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kelly, thank you. Any other member want to ask anything at this stage around clause 1 of the bill? Doesn't appear to be. All right then, we'll move on then to clause 2, if we can. Again, Sharon, if you can just give a brief overview, please. Okay.
I will, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, as members know, clause 2 really is, as I've explained in previous briefing sessions, driven by the need to have a commission that's effective and efficient in terms of the use of public money. So clause 2 introduces a limited power of delegation to staff, provided that those decisions to be delegated are set out in a scheme of delegation agreed by the Department. It also stipulates, however, at clause 2.2, that decisions relating to the opening of a statutory inquiry, the publishing of any resultant report from that inquiry, and orders arising from it, which we know and acknowledge, and the evidence shows, have significant and can have significant consequences for individuals, and the Commission's powers to make subordinate legislation would never be delegated or could never be delegated by staff in terms of how we've currently drafted this. The Minister has recognised that statutory inquiries and the resultant orders can have an impact on individuals. There's been representation to her around these things, as you know, and to you as a committee, around the damage that can cause to reputation and their ability and confidence to continue and act within the charity sector. So just to remind the committee that such orders can be made by staff in other jurisdictions. I know you've heard evidence to that effect in your submissions around the UK and in Ireland, that that staff can make those decisions. But the Minister, on balance, has taken the view that in order to restore public confidence, and she knows that public confidence has been damaged, to restore that confidence in the process here, such decisions would be better taken by commissioners or a committee established by the Commission under Schedule 1 of the Act to make those decisions. And just a wee last point, that such decisions do count for a small percentage of the decisions required of the Commission, just to put that in context. And that's the overview of Clause 2.
Thank you, Sharon. Again, members, you have in your packs an updated version 2 of the evidence summary document for Clause 2. And I'm going to ask you just to bear with me again, just to take a few minutes to go through the issues that have been raised. So firstly, on the power of delegation, members, in our evidence, the overwhelming majority of respondents felt that the power of the Commission to delegate to staff certain functions that are listed in a scheme of delegation is appropriate. We had one individual comment that Clause 2 be removed from the bill to allow time for the report of the independent review of charity regulation to be considered and proper consultation done. And the position in Scotland was highlighted to the committee by the OSCR. The 2005 Act in Scotland expressly grants the power to authorised employees of OSCR to carry out any function on behalf of the regulator. No specific exemptions are provided for. The delegation of functions by OSCR's board is covered by a schedule of delegation. Under this, almost all regulatory decision-making is carried out by employees, but provides for the board to retain certain decision-making in novel or contentious cases. The range of comments made to us on the proposed delegation were that the Commission need to be able to respond to charities in a timely way, and for that reason there is a necessity to delegate to staff. CCNI staff should be able to make certain decisions on their own to ensure that charities are able to receive decisions in a timely manner. The power of delegate or the scheme of delegation should allow Commission staff to operate effectively and efficiently. Registration decisions should only be delegated. Additional resources provided to the Commission to allow for this delegation, and a proposal was made that there should be a process for staff to refer decisions to another committee or board where they feel support is required in borderline cases. Regarding the scheme of delegation in relation to the Department for Communities making the scheme of delegation, there were views for and against who should make the scheme. Comments included requiring the scheme to be made by the Department works against the general principle that CCNI should be independent of ministerial control. The Department is responsible for charity legislation for the oversight of CCNI. It would seem appropriate that it would make the scheme of delegation, and proposals for it to be done on a co-design basis, collaborating with the sector and in particular the CCNI and its staff. Members, there were also some very specific comments from legal bodies expressing reservations about the proposals in the new 9A2 to exclude certain matters from the power of delegations. However, we had a proposal made that delegation should be kept possible in certain of these excluded situations, such as in matters of extreme urgency. For example, if serious wrongdoing in a charity is reported to CCNI, they should be able to open inquiry immediately rather than having to wait for the next board meeting. And also there is also a proposal that, as most of the powers in section 33 to 36 need to be capable of being used urgently at time without waiting for a full CCNI board meeting. It was also highlighted to us that it seems odd to require full board consent for the powers under section 33 to 36, but not require it to use the powers under section 37, which are potentially wider. Sharon, Martin, again, do you want to come in of any clarity around some of those issues?
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Could I just, before Martin, go ahead. Go ahead, Martin. It's just going to, before handing over, Martin, just to give one point that I missed, and that is that this is to take the power to introduce a scheme at a further stage where there would be further consultation in terms of a scheme design and the need for a scheme. So I forgot to outline that, but Martin, go ahead. Sorry for cutting across you.
No problem, Sharon. With regard to the department making the scheme or the commission making the scheme and a co-design process, the department making the scheme would obviously involve a great deal of work with the commission. It is believed that the minister making the final scheme will add confidence to a system that some have lost confidence in. We don't believe this interferes with the independence of the Commission, as the Minister would simply be exercising her role in setting strategic direction for the Commission, but would not intervene in individual cases, which would remain solely the remit of the Commission. With regard to 9A2, again, this was a public confidence thing to stipulate in the bill that certain decisions would never be delegated. But it is important possibly to say at this stage that full board consent wouldn't be required. Schedule 1, Para 9 of the Act allows the Commission to establish committees to discharge its functions. Such actions under 33 to 36 are rare, and the Commission could put emergency procedures in place to deal with them. It could be that other areas, such as Section 37, are not delegated, but this would be for a future scheme. It is felt this way confidence can be rebuilt in areas where decisions could have potentially significant consequences for individuals. The alternative, if you wanted to allow staff to take decisions in emergency conditions, would be probably to remove the stipulation from the bill and just allow everything to be in a scheme of delegation. But then you may have challenges as to what's urgent and what's not urgent.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Any members, any further questions they want to ask Martin around this? Paul, sorry, bring Paul in, please.
Yes, on this, I get the public confidence piece on this, and I get the fact that you would want to ensure that things weren't necessarily delegated down to staff members, individual members. So I get that. I suppose my question is, why are we limiting ourselves to 33 to 36? I get in the first clause, it's because those are the areas where decisions were made. I get that. And that there wasn't decisions made on 32 and 37, as I think we outlined last week. But going forward, why, in order to ensure further confidence that things would be taken, decisions would be made on a collegiate committee basis or a commission level, why would you not add that sections 37 power to direct application of party property, which seems to be a pretty big deal? Why would you not ensure that that was taken at a corporate level or commission level or a collegiate decision? And again, I could go on through various sections of the Charity Act. I suppose, so why are we limiting ourselves? If this clause is all about public confidence, which I believe it is, and I believe it's right to be, why are we limiting ourselves to 33 to 36? Is it just to be neat with clause 1?
No, it's because the powers in 33 to 36 are the ones that can have the biggest impact on individuals. These are the ones that have resulted in the vast majority of appeals to the Charity Tribunal. I think I'm right in saying of approximately 80 appeals to the Charity Tribunal, all but 26 of those appeals were from actions taken under 33 to 36. The thing about putting extra ones in the bill is you lose a certain amount of flexibility. The scheme of delegation, it's by no means a given that anything that's not in this bill will be delegated to staff. That will be the subject to a full public consultation. And it could be that areas such as Section 37, for instance, would not be delegated to staff. It could be that information sharing under Section 24, parts of that will be delegated to staff, but other parts will be reserved for a committee. So it's the more you can put in the scheme of delegation, the greater flexibility. 33 to 36 was there because of the particular circumstances that have arisen from those orders.
So am I right in saying, and again, I probably would need to read clause 2 again, but am I right in saying that on the face of the bill, you're ensuring that 33 to 36 cannot be delegated? The scheme, which will come in the future, will outline what can be delegated. Are you saying that that scheme can also add things that shouldn't be delegated? And if it doesn't mention anything, if things become mute, where does that lie? Where does that leave that section? So what I'm saying is, will the scheme have to delegate
all of
everything?
the other areas? No.
Yes. So if it doesn't, if the scheme doesn't mention a section or a power or a decision-making role, and the face of the bill hasn't, where do those sections lie then?
Well, the delegation in those circumstances would be unlawful. If it's excluded in the bill, it can't then be delegated under a scheme of delegation. If it's not in a scheme of delegation, then it can't be delegated to staff, and if staff took those decisions, they'd be unlawful.
Yeah, but so only 33 to 36. So 9A2C, it mentions 33 to 36, and then you've got A, B, and D with regards to other aspects that cannot be delegated.
Yes.
But imagine the scheme in the future mentions other things that can be delegated. There's bound to be aspects of decision making that aren't included in the bill and aren't included in the scheme. So are we saying that by default they cannot be delegated because they're not in the scheme of delegation?
Yeah, only the regulatory functions that can be delegated to staff, they'll be set out in the scheme. Any regulatory function that isn't delegated to staff in the scheme can't be delivered by staff.
Can't be delivered. And what you're doing in 9A, what you're doing in clause 2, 9A 1 and 2 is basically ensuring in stone that those things can't be delegated. Yeah. Okay. Got you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, thank you. Kelly, you want to come in?
Yeah, just following on from Paul's point, I'm completely confused as to why 37 isn't specifically listed as the following may not be delegated under subparagraph 1, because that's a substantial piece of work, and some of the evidence that the committee has received relates to 37, especially 37(1)(b, that it is necessary or desirable to make an order under this section for the purpose of securing a proper application of that property for the purposes of the charity. And we have received witness statements that have said that property has been taken from individuals. And I'm just thinking that that's the sort of thing there that has and seems to have caused quite significant impact, that it's the sort of thing that you wouldn't leave that to a staff member to be liable for that decision, that you would want it not to be delegated and for it to be done by the Commission.
And that may be the case. that the scheme will be consulted upon, and if it's determined that 37 shouldn't be delegated to staff, then it will not be delegated to staff in the scheme of delegation. I mean, if the committee was 37 could be included in 9A2. It could be added to it. I haven't had time to consider the ramifications of that, but it could be put into 9A2. Again, you lose the flexibility going forward. You will set it in stone that 37 can never be delegated to staff, whereas in a scheme of delegation, that will be determined after public consultation.
I think just my concern on it is that when we talk about delegating to staff, that could allow one person to make a decision, whereas if it's not able to be delegated, then it's the commissioners will make that decision. It's just that checks and balances on it, but it is just the fact that we have received witness information that does appear to reflect directly with the removal of property. And quite significant amounts of property. Now, I'm not going to comment on the outcome of those decisions, but they are some of the ones that sort of stand out for us. So it's just the fact that one member of staff can take a decision to remove property from a person, whereas if we say that 37 is included rather than waiting for the schedules, the group of commissioners then make the decision.
As I said, we can certainly look in that and include 37 in 9A2 if that is what the committee's feeling is on it.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
All right, no other comments from any other member? Or issues raised at this stage? Nope. Okay, then we'll move on then. I didn't think we'd get this far, but we have.
Just Chair, just on
Okay,
that,
go ahead,
I know that Martin has said that he'll look at that, and we're grateful for that. Just so that the committee is still agile on this and still responsive on this, I think we should also consider an amendment if the department don't follow through. Thanks.
Grant, thank you, Paul. All right, we're going to move on then to clause 3. Again, Sharon, do you want to give us a brief overview there?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so as members know from previous briefings as well, clause 3 doesn't arise directly from the judgments. Rather, it provides a power to introduce a registration threshold through regulations at some future point if, and I think the if should be in capitals, if the Minister was minded to consider this policy change. I suppose it emerges from the fact that a threshold has been long called for by some organisations in the volunteering community and charity sector here. The Minister's been lobbied on it, and the committee has heard it firsthand, I think, some quite strongly held views from representative bodies. Just to give you an assurance, it's in the bill, but such a change would require, like the scheme of delegation, a full consultation to ensure that such a major change to the framework would be properly evidenced, after which then the Minister could decide whether it was appropriate, and crucially this power then would give her the ability to respond quickly without the need for a further bill. It is proposed in the way this is drafted, that any subsequent regulations that the Minister would bring would of course be subject not just to full public consultation, but the draft affirmative procedure, which would allow for fulsome debate and scrutiny in the Assembly. The Department, in drafting this clause, was mindful that the power would need to be wide enough to allow for threshold to be introduced in a way that could address any other impacts arising from the Act. So clause 3 therefore has new section 16A to 16C into the Act. But I just want to assure members that, you know, the independent review of charity regulation, as you know, has been looking at the previous issue we just talked about in terms of delegation to staff. It also has been looking at this issue. So there will be that quite fulsome consultation that's already been done. And then before any decision would be arrived at by the Minister, she would undertake further consultation in this regard. So that's all I suppose I want to say by way of introduction to it, and Martin and I are happy to clarify.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. And again, just bear with me while I read out just some of the issues that have been raised with ourselves. Members, in our evidence, the majority of respondents felt that it was appropriate to have this power in the bill, with some noting that a timetable needs to be in place for the introduction of Clause 3 to ensure that this is implemented as soon as possible. The UK-wide Charity Law Association, which established a working party to look at the bill, noted that its members had differing views. Some members of the working party felt that the proposed regime of exempt charities in the bill would work well. Other members of this working party felt that any organisation established in Northern Ireland and making claims to charitable status should be registered with CCNI, but with less weighty accounting and reporting required for small charities. This would be similar to the situation in Scotland. The comments from those opposed to the threshold for registration included, such a threshold could mean a whole regime of NI charities exempted from registration and other oversight by CCNI, and allow a tier of organisations, which are charities in law, but having no registration with CCNI, yet still potentially subject to certain aspects of the 2008 Act. In that regard, a proposal was made to us to retain the system under which all organisations claiming charitable status must seek to register with CCNI under Section 16.2 of the 2008 Act and require them to file accounts, but exempting those below a certain income level from the requirement to have their accounts independently examined. Exemptions from regulation require more careful and detailed consideration, so this should not be rushed through as an add-on to the bill, but urgently needs to rectify the unlawful delegation use. Perhaps a simpler system for bodies that are very small in size and income would be a suitable compromise, with an option to apply to register if the institution wished to have charity status, and the level of threshold should be decided in collaboration with the wider sector, taking into account the views of individual charities and also representative bodies. Respondents were asked to provide further comments on the list of matters that the regulations on the threshold will cover, and the comments included whether a threshold should be based on income alone or whether it should be based on income and assets. Reporting requirements need to be proportionate to the size of the organisation and to take into account whether it is a wholly voluntary-led organisation or whether there are paid staff. Accounting and reporting thresholds need revised to help relieve the burden on small registered charities, and the Department should take this opportunity to bring into force that part of the legislation which provides for charitable incorporated organisations. So, back over to you again, Martin and Sharon and Martin. Anything you want to comment on that?
I suppose all I have to say about that, Chair, is that these are all matters that will need to be consulted on. As Sharon has said, this bill doesn't introduce a threshold. It simply provides a power so that there can be a debate on it, and if it's deemed appropriate, it can be brought in reasonably quickly. You'll know yourself, regulations would take approximately a year to bring in, whereas a bill with a fair wind takes 2 to 2.5 years to develop and pass. The fact that such regulations would be subject to draft affirmative procedure would allow for proper scrutiny. But what we simply did on this was draft the regulation power wide enough so that you could look at what level the threshold should be set at, whether it would be income only, whether it could be income and assets, any evidence gathering requirements that might be required of the Commission, whether a charity could register voluntarily or not if it fell below the threshold, whether if it fell below the threshold it could be removed from the charity register, whether other parts of legislation would need to be amended as a result of bringing in essentially a new category of charity. But those are all decisions for the future. This bill simply will allow any regulations to address what decisions are made as a result of that consultation.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Kelly, you wanted to come in there?
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. As was said earlier, the power to set thresholds, it's all there. It's all about May, and the regulations will have to bring forward. I'm just quite, I know that, let me just quote it here. So under 3, oh my goodness, how do you quote this? 16A, 16A7. That's the one where, that's the part where it's the affirmative, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
I just want to check with you. It's the choice. We've heard from plenty who have said that, if there's a threshold, it needs to be a low enough level because we do have smaller charities out there. But in not being on a charity register means that they will be excluded from being able to apply for a significant amount of charitable funding. Even grants up to £1,000, for instance, require charities to be on a register. So do you envisage that choice to be brought forward? Because I'm very aware then under the 16B part, where regulations under 16A may make provision requiring or authorising the Commission to require any relevant organisation to provide them with evidence. So I'm just wondering if charities, if you envisage that the consultation will allow for a choice whether or not, if there is a threshold brought in, that charities can still apply if they're beneath that threshold. And then are we not tying them up in knots anyway under 16B, because the CCNI can ask them to provide the same evidence as a multi-million-pound charity in any case? We're not limiting down what they can ask for in 16B.
Kelly, certainly the regulations allow for a charity that falls below any threshold to voluntarily register if they want. With regard to 16B, that enables the Commission to seek whatever evidence is required from an institution. So, for instance, in respect to the threshold, any charity that falls below the threshold, they'll not have to produce an annual report and accounts to provide to the Commission, but they'll still be subject to charity regulation. So if a member of the public has a concern about a body, the Commission would have to first determine that it falls within its jurisdiction. So it would need to be able to request evidence from that body to determine whether it was a charity, to determine whether in fact it had any jurisdiction. Otherwise, a concern about such a body would probably have to go to the police. So those evidence requirements, we're not envisaging setting up a whole separate register of charities that fall below a threshold, but there needs to be a power for the Commission to seek evidence from a body. For instance, again, a body could misrepresent itself as a charity that falls below the threshold. So in a case like that, if a member of the public was concerned about that, the Commission needs the power to get the evidence from that body to determine first whether it's a charity, and number two, whether it's misrepresented itself as a charity that falls below the threshold and doesn't have to be registered.
Okay. The threshold is talked about, well, we're all sort of assuming it's being talked about as money, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm quite concerned that there are organisations who have charitable objectives that are not charities because they do more than those objectives and therefore are outside it. While they may be philanthropic, is that the way you pronounce it? You couldn't by any way or mean determine them as a charity. So I'm just wondering, is there an intention then to even consult on what threshold is, because it may not necessarily be money?
Well, if they're not a charity, they'll not be subject to this at all. It only relates to charities that fall below the threshold to register.
Okay. I think
it simply applies to charities.
I think it just concerns me, having been through the hoops of applying for the charitable status under the new rules. You have to jump through hoops to provide so much information, and even have to amend your objectives to ensure that you comply with the requirements. But I know that there are organisations who may have been in the past, through Companies House, HMRC, listed as charities, who, when the registration came up, they went, no, we're not really a charity, and actually we may well be paying money back to HMRC. But then they were forced to go through the process of becoming a charity, and I don't quite understand how that can be when objectives and actions haven't linked up. So I'm just wondering in that, the relevant institution, you're saying it has to be an institution or a person connected with an institution for 16B. So if a private company or a private individual who has their own company wouldn't necessarily be linked in with this then, even though they're philanthropic?
No, unless they're representing themselves as a charity, then the Commission would be able to seek evidence from them to determine whether they're a charity or not.
Okay.
But the Charities Act only relates to charities. You only have to register if you're a charity.
Yeah.
If you're not a charity, you don't have to register. As I said previously, we'll get some more information from the Charity Commission on this for you. But I can't believe, and I've no evidence myself of organisations being forced to be a charity. The determination is made on the 3 tests in sections 1 to 3 of the Act.
Okay.
Now, it may be that if an organisation has a slight problem with a governing document and wants to be a charity, it can get advice as to how it could change that governing document if it wishes charitable status. But I would be amazed, frankly, if any organisations were being forced to be charities.
Okay. I don't know how much the department has a copy of the evidence that we have received. I'm sure you have received it from the individuals too, over many years, I'm sure. It might be worthwhile looking at them because that's what they have been telling us. So it could be, I know in those early days there was definite hammer to crack a nut to get a lot of organisations to go forward to apply. But it's the fact that this is a voluntary application as opposed to a mandatory application is the difficulty here. But no, thank you for that. I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but you are helping to clarify things in my mind. Thank you, Martin.
Okay, no other member has indicated they want to ask anything around the clause 3 at this stage. I know I am conscious you will be back with us again, so that's fine. So can I just, unless there's anything further, either Sharon or Martin, you want to add at this stage?
Just one,
go ahead.
Madam Chair, just one final point of clarification on that last issue that Ms Armstrong has raised and Martin has responded to. From the engagement that took place during the independent review of charity regulation, I would expect some commentary on what the member has just reported to us in the report. As you know, we await the finalisation of the report and the Minister's views on it, but I think there certainly has been some of those issues that Ms Armstrong refers to have been raised in some of those seminars, so it's something that we as a department will be reflecting on. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. We await that report with bated breath.
Look, thank you both for your time today. And no doubt we'll not be too long before we're speaking to you again, so thank you.
Great, thanks.
All right, members. Just before I move on to the next agenda item, can I just ask members' permission then if we could just move into a short closed session after AOB, just so the committee clerk can just clarify with us anything further that we need to be doing. Okay, so I'm going to move on then to agenda item 11, which is any other business. Andy, you had something you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, Chair, it was just coming back to the COVID heating payment. We were given assurances by the department any individuals who were subject of an appeal, which was subsequently upheld, that falls within the eligibility criteria for the COVID-19 heating payment would receive payment. It's just that we can follow up with the department to ascertain to date how many individuals have received payment and what the new overall budget was delivered to those under that scheme.
Absolutely, we'll follow that up. Anybody else, anything under AOB at this stage? No? Okay. Then that's our meeting finished. We're going to move into closed session, so if we can move all the members up then into the spotlight. And I will close this. Sorry, 1 minute.
Date, time.
Oh, haven't done that, yeah. Forgot about that. Date, time and location of our next meeting then will be Tuesday, 2nd of November 2021 at 9 AM and it'll be next door in room 30. Okay, members? Thank you.
Committee room 29.